Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. When answering a call, do your instincts tell you to turn back? Like the sixth sense that all police officers develop after years on the job? That October night in Brooklyn, I should have listened to my instincts. But I didn't. And what happened to me that night still wakes me up at 3 a.m., staring at my ceiling, wondering if I could have acted differently. My name's Michael Rodriguez, and I've been with the NYPD for 12 years. Started when I was 23, fresh out of the academy, thinking I'd make a difference. You learn quick that the city doesn't care about your ideals. It chews you up, spits you out, and if you're lucky, you retire with most of your sanity intact. I wasn't one of the lucky ones. It was October 23rd, a Tuesday night, around 11:45 p.m. I was working the graveyard shift in Brooklyn's 75th precinct, Cypress Hills in East New York. If you know anything about New York, you know these aren't the neighborhoods tourists visit. My partner that night was Anthony Russo, a good cop, 15 years on the force. We'd been partners for 3 years, and I trusted him with my life. Still do, even after everything that happened. We were parked on Atlantic Avenue, engine running, heat on full blast because October in New York can be brutal when you're sitting in a patrol car all night. Tony was telling me about his daughter's soccer game when dispatch crackled to life. Unit 7-5-1-9, we have a possible 10-54 at 1847 Pitkin Avenue, apartment 4B. Caller reports hearing screams from neighboring apartment, then sudden silence. Caller is elderly female, sounds distressed. 10-54 meant a possible dead body. Tony and I exchanged glances. We'd handled dozens of these calls. Usually, they turned out to be nothing. Someone's TV too loud. A dramatic argument that ended with someone storming out. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the address. 1847. Pitkin was in one of those old pre-war buildings. The kind with thin walls where you could hear everything your neighbors did. If someone was screaming loud enough to worry an elderly woman at nearly midnight, it was worth checking out. Unit 7-5-1-9 responding, I said into the radio. ETA 5 minutes. Tony flipped on the lights but kept the siren off. No need to announce our arrival. As we drove through the empty streets, that feeling in my gut got stronger. You ever have one of those moments where time seems to slow down and you notice every little detail? That's how I felt pulling up to that building. The way the streetlight flickered on the corner. The cat that darted across the road. The complete absence of anyone on the street, which was unusual even for a Tuesday night. The building was exactly what you'd expect. 6 stories of fading red brick, fire escapes zigzagging down the front like metal scars. The entrance door was propped open with a brick, which wasn't unusual, but wasn't exactly reassuring either. We climbed to the 4th floor, our boots echoing in the stairwell. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hallway. As we approached, I noticed the door to 4A was cracked open, just an inch. Through the gap, I could see an eye watching us. Probably the elderly woman who'd called it in. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Did you make the call?" I asked softly. The door opened wider, revealing a woman in her 70s, wearing a floral nightgown and thick glasses. Her hands were shaking. Yes, I called. The screaming, it was horrible. Like someone was being, I don't know, hurt bad, real bad. Then it just stopped, all at once. And that was 20 minutes ago, and I haven't heard nothing since. What about the tenant? You know who lives there? Tony asked. Young woman, maybe 30, Emily something. Johnson, I think. Nice girl, quiet usually. Works at the hospital, comes home late, but tonight... She trailed off, shaking her head. We thanked her and asked her to go back inside and lock her door. Then Tony and I positioned ourselves at 4B. I knocked, firm and loud. NYPD, open up. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Emily Johnson? This is the police. We need to check if you're okay. If you don't answer, we're coming in. Still nothing. Tony tried the doorknob. Locked. Want to call for backup? He asked. I should have said yes. Protocol dictated we should have called for backup, especially given the nature of the call. But something, pride, impatience, that feeling that every second counted, made me shake my head. Let's just check it out first. Probably nothing. Tony nodded and stepped back. I'd done this dozens of times before. One solid kick near the lock, and most apartment doors in these old buildings would give. This one was no different. The door flew open, banging against the wall inside. The smell hit us first. Copper and something else. Something sweet and wrong. Blood, a lot of it. We drew our weapons, Tony covering me as I entered first. The apartment was small, a narrow hallway leading to what looked like a living room at the end. The lights were off, but street light from outside provided just enough illumination to see. NYPD. Anyone here? I called out. The silence was oppressive, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. We moved forward slowly, checking the bathroom on our left, empty. Kitchen on the right, also empty, though I noticed a knife missing from the block on the counter. The living room was where we found her. Emily Johnson, based on the mail scattered on the coffee table. She was on the couch, or what was left of her was. I've seen a lot in 12 years, but this was different. It wasn't just that she was dead, it was how she was positioned. Someone had arranged her body carefully, almost artistically. Her arms were crossed over her chest like she was sleeping, but her head was turned completely backward, facing the wall behind the couch. Jesus Christ, Tony whispered. I was about to respond when we heard it, a sound from the bedroom we hadn't checked yet, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. We moved immediately, training taking over. The bedroom door was closed. Tony positioned himself on one side, me on the other. I held up 3 fingers, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. I turned the handle and pushed the door open, both of us rushing in with weapons raised. The room was empty, completely empty, no furniture, nothing. Just bare walls and a hardwood floor. But the window was open, curtains billowing in the cold October wind. Check the fire escape, I told Tony, while I searched the room for any signs of anything. Nobody out here, Tony called from the window. But Mike, you need to see this. I joined him at the window. On the fire escape landing, written in what looked like blood, were 2 words. You're late. We called for backup immediately. Within minutes, the apartment was swarming with cops, CSI, detectives. They processed the scene, took our statements, checked security cameras, which conveniently weren't working that night. The official report stated that Emily Johnson was murdered by an unknown assailant who likely escaped via the fire escape before we arrived. Case closed, or rather, case cold. Another unsolved murder in a city full of them. But here's the thing they didn't put in the report. Here's what's been eating at me for the past 2 years. When the medical examiner arrived and examined Emily's body, he pulled me aside with a confused expression. "Rodriguez, what time did you say you arrived?" "About 12:10 a.m. Why?" He shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, this woman's been dead for at least 6 hours. She died sometime this afternoon, probably around 5 or 6 p.m. "That's impossible," I said. "The neighbor heard screaming 20 minutes before we got here." The ME just shrugged. "I can only tell you what the body tells me. This woman was long dead before anyone heard screaming." I went back to talk to the neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Sorry, I mean Mrs. Martinez. She insisted she knew what she heard. Screaming, horrible screaming, at 11:45 p.m. She was watching the news wide awake, not confused or dreaming. Tony and I never talked about the second part of that night. What happened after we left the scene? After all the other cops had gone home? We were driving back to the precinct when Tony suddenly pulled over. "Mike," he said, his voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. In that empty bedroom, when you were at the window with me, I saw something." "What do you mean?" "There was someone in the corner, standing completely still in the shadows. I only saw them for a second, and when I looked back, they were gone. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but what?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo he'd taken of the empty room. Just standard procedure documentation. In the corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. The face was obscured, but you could make out one detail clearly. The figure's head was turned backward, just like Emily's. We never reported the photo. Who would believe us? But I kept a copy, and late at night I sometimes stare at it, trying to make sense of what we saw. Or what we think we saw. The case officially remains unsolved, but I did some digging on my own time. Emily Johnson did work at the hospital, Brooklyn General, the night shift in the psychiatric ward. 3 days before her death, a patient had escaped during her shift. A man named David Kellerman, admitted for severe dissociative identity disorder and violent tendencies. He was found dead 2 days later, apparent suicide. His body discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Queens. The timeline didn't add up for him to be our killer, but there was. When answering a call, do your instincts tell you to turn back? Like the sixth sense that all police officers develop after years on the job? That October night in Brooklyn, I should have listened to my instincts. But I didn't. And what happened to me that night still wakes me up at 3 a.m., staring at my ceiling, wondering if I could have acted differently. My name's Michael Rodriguez, and I've been with the NYPD for 12 years. Started when I was 23, fresh out of the academy, thinking I'd make a difference. You learn quick that the city doesn't care about your ideals. It chews you up, spits you out, and if you're lucky, you retire with most of your sanity intact. I wasn't one of the lucky ones. It was October 23rd, a Tuesday night, around 11:45 p.m. I was working the graveyard shift in Brooklyn's 75th precinct, Cypress Hills in East New York. If you know anything about New York, you know these aren't the neighborhoods tourists visit. My partner that night was Anthony Russo, a good cop, 15 years on the force. We'd been partners for 3 years, and I trusted him with my life. Still do, even after everything that happened. We were parked on Atlantic Avenue, engine running, heat on full blast because October in New York can be brutal when you're sitting in a patrol car all night. Tony was telling me about his daughter's soccer game when dispatch crackled to life. Unit 7-5-1-9, we have a possible 10-54 at 1847 Pitkin Avenue, apartment 4B. Caller reports hearing screams from neighboring apartment, then sudden silence. Caller is elderly female, sounds distressed. 10-54 meant a possible dead body. Tony and I exchanged glances. We'd handled dozens of these calls. Usually, they turned out to be nothing. Someone's TV too loud. A dramatic argument that ended with someone storming out. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the address. 1847. Pitkin was in one of those old pre-war buildings. The kind with thin walls where you could hear everything your neighbors did. If someone was screaming loud enough to worry an elderly woman at nearly midnight, it was worth checking out. Unit 7-5-1-9 responding, I said into the radio. ETA 5 minutes. Tony flipped on the lights but kept the siren off. No need to announce our arrival. As we drove through the empty streets, that feeling in my gut got stronger. You ever have one of those moments where time seems to slow down and you notice every little detail? That's how I felt pulling up to that building. The way the streetlight flickered on the corner. The cat that darted across the road. The complete absence of anyone on the street, which was unusual even for a Tuesday night. The building was exactly what you'd expect. 6 stories of fading red brick. Fire escapes zigzagging down the front like metal scars. The entrance door was propped open with a brick, which wasn't unusual, but wasn't exactly reassuring either. We climbed to the 4th floor, our boots echoing in the stairwell. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hallway. As we approached, I noticed the door to 4A was cracked open, just an inch. Through the gap, I could see an eye watching us. Probably the elderly woman who'd called it in. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Did you make the call?" I asked softly. The door opened wider, revealing a woman in her 70s, wearing a floral nightgown and thick glasses. Her hands were shaking. Yes, I called. The screaming, it was horrible. Like someone was being, I don't know, hurt bad, real bad. Then it just stopped, all at once. And that was 20 minutes ago, and I haven't heard nothing since. What about the tenant? You know who lives there? Tony asked. Young woman, maybe 30, Emily something. Johnson, I think. Nice girl, quiet usually. Works at the hospital, comes home late, but tonight... She trailed off, shaking her head. We thanked her and asked her to go back inside and lock her door. Then Tony and I positioned ourselves at 4B. I knocked, firm and loud. NYPD, open up. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Emily Johnson? This is the police. We need to check if you're okay. If you don't answer, we're coming in. Still nothing. Tony tried the doorknob. Locked. Want to call for backup? He asked. I should have said yes. Protocol dictated we should have called for backup, especially given the nature of the call. But something, pride, impatience, that feeling that every second counted, made me shake my head. Let's just check it out first. Probably nothing. Tony nodded and stepped back. I'd done this dozens of times before. One solid kick near the lock, and most apartment doors in these old buildings would give. This one was no different. The door flew open, banging against the wall inside. The smell hit us first. Copper and something else. Something sweet and wrong. Blood, a lot of it. One detail in his file that made my blood run cold. Kellerman had been a contortionist in a traveling circus before his mental break. His signature act? He could turn his head 180 degrees. I tried to follow up, but I was told to drop it. The case was closed, Kellerman was dead. Emily Johnson was just another victim of random violence in a city full of it. But I knew better. We both did. Tony transferred to a desk job 6 months later. Said he couldn't do nights anymore, couldn't handle the streets. I understood. That night changed something in both of us. You see things as a cop, terrible things, but you tell yourself there's always an explanation, always a logical reason. But what do you do when logic fails? When the evidence doesn't match reality? When you capture something in a photo that shouldn't exist? I still work nights, still patrol the same streets, but I avoid Pitkin Avenue. And sometimes, when we get calls about screams in the night, I remember that empty bedroom, that figure in the corner, and those 2 words written in blood, "You're late." Late for what, I used to wonder. Now, I think I know. We were late to save Emily Johnson because she was already dead. We were late to catch her killer because he was already dead too. We were late to understand that sometimes, in this city that never sleeps, the dead don't always rest. But the worst part, the part that really keeps me up at night, is what I found when I went back to the building a year later. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I needed closure, maybe I was just torturing myself. The building was being renovated, all the tenants relocated. I convinced the construction foreman to let me into apartment 4B1 last time. The apartment was gutted, just bare walls and exposed pipes. But in the bedroom, that empty bedroom where we saw the figure, I found something the crime scene techs had missed. Scratched into the floorboards, hidden under where the radiator used to be, was a message. Not in blood this time, but carved deep into the wood, like someone had used their fingernails. It was a date and a time. October 23rd, 11:45 p.m., the exact time we got the call. But here's the thing. The building records showed that apartment had been renovated 3 times in the past 20 years. And each time, workers had found similar scratches in the floor. Same date, same time, different years. I cross-referenced the dates with police records. Every single time, on October 23rd at 11:45 p.m., there had been a call to that building. A noise complaint, a wellness check, a reported scream, and every single time, someone had died. Not always in apartment 4B, but always in that building. Always found in impossible positions. Always dead longer than they should have been. The pattern went back to 1952, when the building was first constructed. The original owner, a man named William Arthurs, had been found dead in what would become apartment 4B. His head had been turned backward. Time of the call to police: October 23rd, 11:45 p.m. Time of death according to the coroner: 6 hours earlier. I brought this to my captain. He looked at the evidence, looked at me, and said 5 words that chilled me more than anything else about this case. Some patterns shouldn't be found. He transferred me to a different precinct the next day. Told me to forget about Pitkin Avenue, forget about Emily Johnson, forget about the pattern. But you can't forget something like that. You can't unsee that figure in the corner. You can't unhear the screams that came from a woman who was already dead. I brought this to my captain. He looked at the evidence, looked at me, and said 5 words that chilled me more than anything else about this case. Some patterns shouldn't be found. He transferred me to a different precinct the next day, told me to forget about Pitkin Avenue, forget about Emily Johnson, forget about the pattern. But you can't forget something like that. You can't unsee that figure in the corner. You can't unhear the screams that came from a woman who was already dead. 2 weeks after my transfer, I got a call from Tony. It was 2 a.m., and he was drunk, which wasn't like him at all. He'd been having nightmares, he said, the same nightmare every night. He was back in that apartment, but this time he was alone. He'd walk into the bedroom, and the figure would be there in the corner, but when he tried to look directly at it, his head would start turning. Turning and turning, like someone was twisting it from behind until he could see his own back. Then he'd wake up. "Mike," he said, his voice slurred but desperate. I looked into Kellerman, the contortionist. He wasn't the first patient to escape from that ward. There have been 12 escapes in the past 70 years. All of them died within days of escaping. All of them were found in impossible positions. "Tony, you need to stop." "No, listen." Emily Johnson, she wasn't random. Her grandmother worked at the same hospital in the 1960s, same ward. A patient escaped during her shift, too. Jumped from the hospital roof. They found him with his body twisted into a pretzel shape. Literally. Arms where his legs should be, legs where his arms should be. "You're drunk. Go to sleep." "I can't sleep. Don't you get it? It's connected. The building, the hospital, the deaths. October 23rd, it's all connected." He hung up after that. The next morning, I tried calling him back, but his wife answered. Tony had suffered a mental breakdown, she said. He was taking extended leave, getting help. She asked me not to contact him again. I wanted to let it go. I really did. But curiosity is a dangerous thing for a cop. We're trained to find answers, to solve puzzles, to make sense of chaos. So I kept digging, but carefully, quietly, on my own time. The Brooklyn General Hospital psychiatric ward had a dark history. Built in 1898, it was originally called the Brooklyn Asylum for the Mentally Disturbed. In those days, treatment was primitive. Ice baths, electroshock, lobotomies. Patients died regularly, and their bodies were often used for medical research without family consent. The hospital was sued multiple times, reformed, renamed, but the psychiatric ward remained in the same building, the old asylum structure. Here's what I found that made everything click into place, or at least made the pattern clearer. Every person who had died in that apartment building on Pitkin Avenue had a connection to Brooklyn General. Not always obvious. Sometimes it was a grandparent who had worked there, sometimes a distant relative who had been a patient. But always, somewhere in their family tree, there was a link to that hospital. Emily Johnson's grandmother, as Tony had discovered. The tenant before her, a man named Marcus Washington. His great-uncle had been a patient in 1943. Before him, Sarah Kim, whose mother had been a nurse there in the 1970s. The pattern went back and back, a twisted family tree with roots in that psychiatric ward. I started having dreams too. Not nightmares like Tony's, but strange, vivid dreams where I was walking through the hospital at night. The halls were empty, but I could hear voices from behind the doors, crying, laughing, screaming. And always, at the end of the corridor, a figure standing with its back to me. When I got close enough to touch it, it would turn its head, just its head, and smile at me with too many teeth. 3 months after the Emily Johnson case, I was working my new beat in Manhattan when I got a call I'd been dreading. October 23rd was coming up, and I just knew, that something would happen at that building again. But I was explicitly ordered to stay away. My new captain had been briefed about my obsession with the case. But on October 22nd, I got an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Mrs. Martinez, the elderly neighbor from 4A. She looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. "Officer Rodriguez," she said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I had nowhere else to go. Things have been happening in the building ever since that night." I invited her in, made her tea. She told me that after Emily's death, strange things had been occurring. Doors opening and closing on their own, voices in the walls, and every tenant who had moved in after Emily had left within weeks, terrified. The building was nearly empty now, scheduled for demolition in December. "But that's not why I'm here," she said, her hands trembling around the teacup. I've been doing research. My husband, God rest his soul, he worked at Brooklyn General for 40 years, maintenance. He used to tell me stories about the psychiatric ward, about the things he'd seen. There was one patient he never forgot, a woman named Margaret Arthurs. Arthurs, the same last name as the building's original owner. She was admitted in 1951, Mrs. Martinez continued. Severe schizophrenia, they said, but my husband, he said she wasn't crazy, she was different. She could do things, move things without touching them, know things she couldn't know. The doctors were fascinated by her. They did experiments, terrible experiments. What happened to her? She died during a procedure, October 23, 1952. But here's the thing. She died at 5:45 p.m., exactly 6 hours before her father was found dead in the building, I finished. Mrs. Martinez nodded. My husband was there when they brought her father in, William Arthurs. He said the man's face, it was smiling. Even with his head turned backward, he was smiling. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a group of hospital staff standing in front of Brooklyn General. In the background, barely visible in a third-floor window, was a patient, a woman with long dark hair, her face blurred but her posture unmistakable. Her head was turned to look directly at the camera while her body faced away. "That's her," Mrs. Martinez said. "Margaret Arthurs. This photo was taken the day she died." I studied the photo. There was something wrong with it beyond the obvious. It took me a moment to realize what. Margaret's reflection in the window behind her showed her facing forward, while her actual body had the head turned. It was physically impossible. "Mrs. Martinez, you need to stay away from that building. Don't go back there, especially not tomorrow night." She smiled sadly. "Officer Rodriguez, I'm 93 years old. I've lived in that building for 60 years. I've seen 17 people die on October 23rd. 17 people found with their bodies twisted, all dead 6 hours before anyone heard them scream. I know what's coming." "Then why did you come here?" "Because you're the first cop who didn't dismiss it, the first one who saw the pattern. And I wanted to tell you something before tomorrow night." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Margaret Arthurs isn't gone. My husband saw her 3 times after she died. Once in the hospital morgue, moving between the bodies. Once in the psychiatric ward, standing at the end of the hall. And once in our building, on October 23rd, 1975. He was fixing a broken pipe in the basement when he saw her. She spoke to him, just 1 sentence. What did she say? 'They're not late. They're exactly on time.' Mrs. Martinez left after that, despite my protests. I tried to follow up with her the next day, October 23rd, but she wouldn't answer her phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. On the night of October 23rd, I couldn't hold back. I told myself I would just park nearby and watch from a distance, making sure Mrs. Martinez was okay. But we know that was a lie. Even though the rational part of my brain told me to stay home, I was suddenly drawn to that building. I parked my personal car 2 blocks away from 1847 Pitkin Avenue at 10:30 p.m. I wasn't on duty, had no jurisdiction, no backup. Just me, my off-duty piece, and a desperate need to understand what was happening in that building. The street was eerily quiet. No traffic, no pedestrians. Even the usual sounds of the city seemed muted. The building loomed in the darkness. Only a few windows lit, mostly on the 4th floor where Mrs. Martinez lived. The demolition notice was posted on the front door, scheduled for December 1st. Less than 6 weeks away. I sat in my car, watching, waiting. 11 p.m. came and went. 11:15, 11:30. At 11:40, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure in the fourth-floor hallway window. Not Mrs. Martinez. She was too short to be seen from that angle. This was someone tall, thin, moving with an odd, jerky motion, like a marionette on strings. My phone rang at 11:43. Unknown number. Officer Rodriguez? The voice was feminine but strange, like it was coming through water. You shouldn't have come. Who is this? You know who I am. You've seen my picture, you've heard my story, and in 2 minutes you're going to hear me scream. The line went dead. I was out of my car and running before I could think. The building's front door was open, swinging slowly in the wind. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my heart pounding. As I reached the 4th floor, I heard it. A scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't just one voice, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, all screaming in unison. Mrs. Martinez's door was open. I rushed in, weapon drawn, calling her name. The apartment was dark, but I could see a figure standing in the living room, back turned to me. Mrs. Martinez? The figure's head began to turn, slowly, impossibly, while the body remained still. But it wasn't Mrs. Martinez. It was a young woman with long dark hair, wearing a hospital gown from the 1950s. Margaret Arthur's. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black. "You're late," she said, and her voice was the sound of 17 people speaking at once. "You're always late." "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my gun shaking in my hand. "Want?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I wanted to die. I wanted the experiments to stop. I wanted the doctors to stop cutting into my brain, stop injecting me with their drugs, stop trying to understand what I was. But they didn't stop, not until my heart stopped, and even then, she moved toward me, not walking but gliding, her feet inches off the floor. Even then, they didn't stop. They kept my brain, kept pieces of me in jars, studied me, dissected me, tried to replicate what I could do. And all that pain, all that suffering, it had to go somewhere. It went into the walls of that hospital, into the very foundations, and when they released my body to my father. She was inches from me now. I could smell formaldehyde and decay. I went with it, into his building, into these walls. And every year on the anniversary of my death, I call out. I scream the scream I couldn't scream when they were cutting into my brain without anesthesia. And someone always comes, someone always listens, someone always joins me. "Where's Mrs. Martinez?" I asked. Margaret smiled, and her mouth opened too wide, showing too many teeth. "She's here." They're all here. Everyone who answered the call. Everyone who came when they heard the screaming. The room suddenly filled with figures. Translucent, twisted, each one in an impossible position. I recognized Emily Johnson, her head still backward. An elderly man with his arms where his legs should be. A young boy bent into a perfect circle. And there, in the corner, Mrs. Martinez. Her body contorted into an angle that made me want to vomit. "But you," Margaret continued, "you're different. You didn't come because you heard screaming. You came because you needed to know. Because the pattern called to you, because you're like me. I'm nothing like you. No. You see patterns others miss. You know things you shouldn't know. You dream of walking through the hospital. You're sensitive, Officer Rodriguez. That's why you could see the figure in the photograph. That's why you could hear the real screaming, not just the echo." She reached out and touched my forehead with one cold finger, and suddenly I could see everything. I saw the hospital as it was in 1952. The psychiatric ward was a nightmare of screaming patients, sadistic orderlies, and doctors who saw their charges as specimens rather than people. I saw Margaret Arthurs, just 16 years old when she was admitted. Her crime? She could see things others couldn't. She knew when people were going to die. She could move objects with her mind when she was frightened. Her parents, terrified and ashamed, had committed her. I saw the experiments. Dr. Harold Brennan, the head of psychiatric research, was obsessed with her abilities. He believed he could isolate the part of the brain responsible for her gifts. He performed surgery after surgery, each one more invasive than the last. No anesthesia. He wanted to see how her brain responded to pain. He removed pieces of her temporal lobe, her parietal lobe, her frontal cortex, keeping each piece in formaldehyde to study later. I saw her death. October 23rd, 1952, 5:45 p.m. Her heart simply stopped during the 13th surgery. Dr. Brennan tried to revive her for 6 hours, not out of compassion, but because he wasn't done with his experiments. At 11:45 p.m., he finally declared her dead and had her body taken to the morgue. But Margaret wasn't gone. Her consciousness, scattered across all those pieces of brain tissue he'd preserved, reformed into something else. Something powered by pain and rage and the desperate need to be heard. She infected the hospital like a virus, spreading through the walls, the floors, the very air. And when her father came to claim her body, she followed him home. I saw William Arthur's death. He was in apartment 4B, the apartment he'd kept empty as a shrine to his daughter, when she appeared to him. He tried to embrace her, crying, apologizing for committing her. She embraced him back, turning his head around so he could see what she had seen, the world from her twisted perspective. I saw every death since then. 17 people over 70 years, each one connected to the hospital. Each one dying at 5:45 p.m., but not discovered until after 11:45. Margaret killed them at the exact time she died, but their bodies existed in a state between life and death until the moment she was officially declared dead. They were trapped in those 6 hours, experiencing their death over and over again. "Now you understand," Margaret said, pulling her finger away. I gasped, falling to my knees. The pattern isn't random. It's justice. Everyone who dies in this building had an ancestor who participated in my suffering. Nurses who held me down. Orderlies who laughed at my screams. Administrators who signed the papers, allowing the experiments. Even distant relatives of patients who did nothing while I begged for help. Emily Johnson's grandmother was just a nurse, I protested. Just a nurse? Margaret's voice rose to a shriek. She held my arms while they drilled into my skull. She told me to be a good girl and stop fighting. She watched them take pieces of my brain and did nothing. And Mrs. Martinez? Her husband cleaned the operating room, mopped up my blood, disposed of the pieces of brain tissue when Brennan was done with them, threw me away like garbage. I struggled to my feet. So what about me? My family has no connection to the hospital. Why am I here? Margaret tilted her head, studying me. No, you're not here for justice. You're here for a different purpose. She glided over to the window, looking out at the city below. This building will be demolished soon. My father's shrine to me, destroyed. I'll have nowhere to go unless... Unless what? Unless I find a new host. Someone sensitive enough to carry me. Someone who understands patterns, who sees what others miss. Someone like you, Officer Rodriguez. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut. The twisted figures of the dead moved closer, surrounding me. You can't force me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Force? Margaret laughed again. I don't need to force you. You're already infected. Every time you looked at that photograph, every time you dreamed of the hospital, every time you felt drawn to this building, I was entering your mind, piece by piece, just like Dr. Brennan took pieces of me. I felt it then, a presence in my mind, foreign and familiar at the same time. Memories that weren't mine. Medical procedures I'd never experienced. Pain I'd never felt. "Fight it," a voice said. And I turned to see Mrs. Martinez, her body still contorted, but her eyes clear. "She's not as strong as she thinks. The demolition, it's not to destroy the building. It's to release her. The city knows. They've always known. The pattern repeats because she's trapped here, bound to her father's building." Margaret screamed, a sound that shattered the windows. "Silence! You're dead! The dead don't speak!" "We speak when the living need to hear," Mrs. Martinez replied. "Officer Rodriguez, you have a choice. You can accept her into your mind and become her new prison, carrying her horror wherever you go. Or, ... quote. Or what? Or you can complete the pattern. But not the way she wants." I understood then. The pattern wasn't just about death. It was about witnessing. Every cop who responded to these calls, every person who heard the screams, they were witnesses to Margaret's pain. But they always arrived too late, just as the doctors had declared her dead too late, after hours of trying to revive her for their own purposes. What if someone wasn't late? I asked. What if someone arrived at exactly the right time? Margaret's black eyes widened. "No, you can't. The pattern is set. It cannot be broken." I looked at my watch. 11:44 p.m., 1 minute until the time of the call. "Every pattern can be broken," I said. "You just need to find the right point of intervention." I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done earlier. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Officer Michael Rodriguez, badge number 3847. I need immediate backup at 1847 Pitkin Avenue, apartment 4B. Officer in distress. Possible 10:54. Time of call 11:44 and 45 seconds p.m. 15 seconds early." The change was immediate. Margaret screamed, but this time it wasn't the scream of 17 voices. It was the scream of a 16-year-old girl, frightened and alone. The twisted figures of the dead began to straighten, their bodies returning to normal positions. The room flickered between the present and the past. One moment I was in Mrs. Martinez's apartment. The next, I was in a 1950s operating room. "What have you done?" Margaret cried. But she was changing too. The hospital gown became a regular dress. The black eyes became brown. The pale skin gained color. "I've changed the pattern," I said. "For 70 years, help has always arrived too late. But not tonight. Tonight, someone called for help before you died. But I'm already dead. Are you? Or are you just stuck in the moment between life and death, replaying it over and over? What if someone had called for help 15 seconds earlier that day in 1952? What if someone had stopped Dr. Brennan before that final surgery?" The room was shaking now, the walls cracking. Through the cracks, I could see not the night sky, but a bright afternoon in October 1952. A hospital corridor. A young girl being wheeled toward an operating room. "You can't change the past," Margaret said, but she sounded uncertain now, more like the frightened teenager she had been. "No, but I can change the pattern. And sometimes, that's enough." Sirens in the distance. My backup was coming. But more than that, I could hear other sirens, older ones from 1952. Someone had called the police about suspicious activities at Brooklyn General. Someone had reported Dr. Brennan's unauthorized experiments. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered. "You said it yourself. I'm sensitive. I see patterns others miss, but I also see how to break them." The room exploded with light. For a moment, I saw everything at once, past and present, life and death, the pattern and its breaking. I saw Dr. Brennan being arrested. I saw Margaret Arthurs being released from the hospital, alive and whole. I saw 17 people who had died over 70 years suddenly gasping for breath, their deaths undone. And then darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed. Not Brooklyn General. That had been closed down years ago. Tony was sitting beside my bed, looking haggard but relieved. Jesus, Mike, you've been out for 3 days. They found you in that building on Pitkin. Gas leak, they said. You were hallucinating, talking about patterns and ghosts. The whole building had to be evacuated. Mrs. Martinez? Who? Mike, that building's been empty for months, scheduled for demolition. I wanted to argue, but then I saw the newspaper on his lap. The headline read, Brooklyn General Hospital Records. Discovered evidence of 1950s medical experiments. When did this story break? I asked. 3 days ago, October 23rd around midnight. Anonymous tip led police to sealed records in the hospital's basement. Turns out some doctor named Brennan was performing illegal experiments on psychiatric patients. Real sick stuff. The city's opening an investigation. Families are filing lawsuits. It's a mess. I lay back in the bed understanding. The pattern had been broken, but in breaking it, reality had restructured itself. Margaret Arthurs had never died in that operating room because the police had arrived in time. The 17 deaths had never happened because there was no vengeful spirit to cause them. Mrs. Martinez might never have existed at all, or might have lived a completely different life. But I remembered. Somehow, I remembered everything. The following weeks continued with the psychiatric evaluations, counseling, and desk work I was forced to undergo. The official documents stated that I had been exposed to an acute gas leak while investigating an abandoned building during non-working hours. Hallucinations, they said. A temporary psychosis caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. Everyone was very calm, understanding, and sympathetic. Too sympathetic. Tony knew something was off. He'd visit me during my sessions with the department shrink, Dr. Patricia Hayes, and afterward, he'd give me these looks. Like he was trying to figure out if I was really crazy or if something else had happened that night. The mind can play tricks, Dr. Hayes would say during our sessions, especially under extreme stress. You've been a police officer for 12 years, Officer Rodriguez. You've seen trauma, violence, death. Sometimes our minds create elaborate fantasies to process that trauma. I wanted to tell her about the newspaper article, about Dr. Brennan and the experiments at Brooklyn General. But every time I tried, the words wouldn't come. It was like something was stopping me. Some invisible barrier between what I knew and what I could say. 3 weeks after the incident, I was cleared for active duty. Light duty at first, day shifts, paperwork, nothing too stressful. They partnered me with a rookie, Officer Sophia Martinez. The name made me pause when I first heard it, but she was nothing like the elderly Mrs. Martinez from my hallucination. Sophia was 25, fresh out of the academy, eager to learn from a veteran cop. I heard about what happened, she said on our first day together. The gas leak thing must have been scary. Yeah, I said, not really wanting to discuss it. It was. We were doing a routine patrol in downtown Brooklyn when the call came in. Disturbance at a construction site. Oh, nothing unusual. Probably just kids messing around. But when dispatch gave the address, my blood ran cold. 1847 Pitkin Avenue. That's the building, Sophia said, checking her notes. The one with the gas leak where they found you. Yeah. They're demolishing it today. Finally. Thing's been empty for years, apparently. Total eyesore. I wanted to tell her to turn around, to ignore the call, to stay away from that place. But I couldn't. Something was pulling me back, just like before. We arrived to find the demolition crew standing around, looking confused and slightly frightened. The foreman, a burly man named Frank, approached us immediately. "Officers, thank God, we've got a situation here." "What kind of situation?" Sophia asked. We were doing the final walkthrough before demolition, making sure the building was completely empty, and we found something in the basement. My heart was pounding as we followed Frank into the building. It looked different in the daylight, smaller, less menacing, just an old building waiting to die. But as we descended into the basement, that familiar feeling returned, the sense of wrongness, of patterns hidden beneath the surface. Frank led us to a corner of the basement that had been walled off. The demolition crew had broken through while checking the foundation, revealing a hidden room. "We haven't gone in," Frank said. "Figured we should wait for you folks." I stepped through the hole in the wall, flashlight in hand, Sophia right behind me. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The walls were covered in writing, not graffiti, but careful, deliberate text. Names, dates, medical terms. And in the center of the room, a metal table with leather straps. An operating table. "What the hell is this?" Sophia whispered. I knew exactly what it was. This was Dr. Brennan's private operating room, not at Brooklyn General, but here, in this building. The pattern suddenly made more sense. William Arthurs hadn't just owned this building. He had been Brennan's partner. He had provided a secret location for the most extreme experiments, the ones even the hospital wouldn't allow. "We need to call this in," I said. "This is a crime scene." As Sophia made the call, I examined the walls more closely. The names were all familiar. Emily Johnson's grandmother, Mrs. Martinez's husband, and dozens of others. But these weren't the names of victims. They were the names of participants, nurses, orderlies, administrators who had helped Brennan conduct his experiments in secret. And there, in the corner, almost hidden by decades of dust and grime, was a photograph pinned to the wall. Margaret Arthurs, but not as I had seen her in my hallucination. This Margaret was smiling, standing next to Dr. Brennan and a man who had to be her father. The photograph was dated October 22, 1952, one day before her supposed death. I took the photograph, slipping it into my pocket before Sophia could see. As I did, I noticed something else. A small metal box hidden behind where the photograph had been. Inside were glass vials, each containing what looked like preserved tissue samples. Brain tissue. Each vial was labeled with a date and a part of the brain. Temporal lobe, October 1st. Parietal lobe, October 8th. Frontal cortex, October 15th. 13 vials in total, documenting 13 surgeries. But there was a 14th vial, empty, labeled October 23rd, complete integration. "Mike," Sophia called, "you need to see this." She was standing by the operating table, pointing at something underneath. I knelt down and saw a trap door, partially hidden by the table's base. Together, we moved the table and opened the door. The smell hit us first, not decay, but chemicals. Formaldehyde, alcohol, and something else, something sweet and cloying. A ladder led down into darkness. "We should wait for backup," Sophia said. She was right. Protocol demanded we wait. But I could hear something down there, a humming sound, mechanical and rhythmic, like medical equipment. "Stay here," I told her. "I'm just going to take a quick look." I descended the ladder before she could protest. The sub-basement was larger than expected, extending beyond the footprint of the building above. The humming was louder here, coming from machines that lined the walls. Old machines, but somehow still running, their lights blinking in sequence. The machines were connected to glass cylinders, each one filled with a murky fluid. And floating in that fluid, I wanted to throw up. I wanted to run. But I forced myself to look closer. They weren't bodies in the cylinders. They were parts. Brain tissue, organs, all preserved and somehow still alive, connected by tubes and wires to the machines. A note was taped to one of the cylinders. The paper yellow with age, but the ink still readable. The integration project continues. Subject shows remarkable resistance to complete dissolution. Consciousness remains intact despite physical separation. October 23rd will mark the final attempt at reintegration. If successful, subject will exist in a state between life and death, capable of inhabiting multiple hosts simultaneously. Dr. H. Brennan, October 20th, 1952. I heard footsteps on the ladder. Sophia was coming down despite my orders, but when I turned, it wasn't Sophia. It was a man in a 1950s doctor's coat, his face aged but unmistakable from the photographs. Dr. Harold Brennan. "You're not supposed to be here yet," he said, checking his pocket watch. "It's only 3 p.m. The pattern doesn't complete until 11:45. "You're dead," I said, reaching for my weapon. "You died decades ago." He laughed, a dry, papery sound. "Dead? No, Officer Rodriguez. I'm as alive as Margaret is dead, which is to say, we exist in a state that defies simple categorization. The experiments were a complete success. Margaret was the perfect subject. Her natural sensitivity allowed her consciousness to survive the separation. Each piece of her brain we removed retained awareness, remained connected to the whole. When we attempted the final integration on October 23rd, something wonderful happened. She existed everywhere and nowhere at once. You tortured a 16-year-old girl. I elevated her. She became something more than human, a pattern in reality itself, able to exist across multiple timelines, multiple possibilities. Every person who dies in this building doesn't just die once. They die in every possible version of reality where they existed. And Margaret experiences each death, feeds on it, grows stronger. That's why the pattern repeats, I said, understanding finally dawning. It's not about revenge. It's about power. Each death on October 23rd increases her reach. Precisely. And tonight, with the building's demolition, she'll be released from the physical constraints of this place. She'll be able to spread across the entire city, the entire world. Every sensitive, every person with even a hint of psychic ability will become her host. Starting with me. You were chosen the moment you responded to that first call. Margaret has been preparing you, showing you the pattern, making you understand. You're not just sensitive, Officer Rodriguez. You're a natural conduit. With you as her primary host, she can... The gunshot echoed through the sub-basement. Dr. Brennan looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then at me, surprised. You shot me. You're right, I said. I am sensitive. Sensitive enough to know that you're not a ghost or a memory. You're real, flesh and blood, hiding down here for 70 years, keeping yourself alive with the same technology you used on Margaret. He fell to his knees, gasping. You don't understand. Without me to maintain the machines, without me to complete the pattern breaks, I finished. He collapsed, his breath rattling in his chest. As he died, the machines began to fail, lights flickering and going dark. The fluid in the cylinders started to bubble and drain. "Mike?" Sophia's voice from above. "Mike, what's happening?" I heard a shot. "Call for backup," I shouted. "And an ambulance. Officer involved shooting." As the machines died one by one, I felt something shift in the air. A presence that had been building since I first entered the building was dissipating. Margaret was leaving, not in triumph, but in dissolution. Without Brennan to maintain the technology that kept her consciousness trapped between life and death, she was finally able to truly die. But as the last machine went dark, I heard her voice one more time, not angry, but grateful. Thank you for being on time. The investigation that followed was extensive. The sub-basement revealed decades of evidence about Brennan's experiments. He had faked his death in 1973 and continued his work in secret, funded by selling his research to foreign governments and private corporations interested in consciousness manipulation. The preserved tissue samples were indeed from Margaret Arthur's and other patients, kept in a state of suspended animation. The media had a field day. Mad scientists' secret lab discovered under Brooklyn building. NYPD. Officer uncovers decades-old conspiracy. The horror of Pitkin Avenue. I was credited with solving a 70-year-old case, received a commendation, and was promoted to detective. Everyone wanted to hear the story of how I'd discovered the lab, how I'd known to look in the basement. I told them it was instinct, pattern recognition, good old-fashioned police work. I never told them about my hallucination during the gas leak incident. Never mentioned seeing Margaret or the 17 dead. According to the new timeline, those deaths never happened. The building had been empty for years, slowly rotting, while Brennan continued his experiments below. But sometimes, late at night, I checked the old records. And in some of them, the ones that were digitized before October 23rd, I find traces, references to deaths that no longer occurred, police reports that were filed and then mysteriously deleted, a pattern that existed and then didn't. 6 months after the Pitkin Avenue discovery, I thought I was done with Margaret Arthurs and Dr. Brennan. The case was closed, the building demolished, the sub-basement filled with concrete. I'd moved on to other cases, other patterns. Sophia Martinez had been assigned a new partner, and I was working solo as a detective, which suited me fine. But patterns, I've learned, don't always end when you think they do. It started with the dreams again. Not the same dreams as before, these were different. I wasn't walking through empty hospital corridors. I was sitting in a room with Margaret Arthurs. Not the twisted spirit I'd seen that night, but the girl she had been before the experiments. 16, bright, scared. You changed the pattern, she would say. But patterns have momentum. They want to complete themselves. You're free now, I would tell her. Brennan is dead, the machines are destroyed. Am I free, or am I just scattered? Pieces of me in every person who ever felt my presence, ever heard my scream. I would wake up at 5:45 a.m. every time, the exact time she had originally died. 3 weeks into these dreams, I got a call from the evidence locker. Some of the items from the Pitkin Avenue scene had been marked for disposal, and they needed my signature. Routine paperwork, nothing unusual. But when I got there, the evidence clerk, an old-timer named Bill, pulled me aside. Rodriguez, you might want to look at this before we destroy it. He handed me an evidence bag containing one of the vials from Brennan's lab. The one labeled Complete Integration. The one I thought had been empty. It wasn't empty anymore. Inside was a small amount of clear fluid with something suspended in it. Something that looked like a seed or a spore, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence. That wasn't there when we cataloged it, Bill said. I checked the intake photos. The vial was empty 6 months ago. Now, he shrugged. Probably some kind of contamination, but I thought you should know. I took the vial back to my desk, staring at it under the lamp. The thing inside was definitely organic, definitely alive, and it was growing. I could see it changing, developing, right before my eyes. My phone rang. Unknown number. Detective Rodriguez. The voice was familiar but impossible. This is Dr. Patricia Hayes. I need to speak with you about your recent dreams. How did you know about... Because I've been having them too. So have 17 other people across the city. All of us connected to your case in some way. All of us dreaming of a girl named Margaret. I met Dr. Hayes at a coffee shop in Manhattan, far from any police precinct. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she lifted her cup. It started 3 weeks ago, she said. The dreams. At first, I thought it was just my subconscious processing your case. But then, I did some research. Every psychologist who evaluated you after the gas leak incident is having the same dreams. So are the EMTs who responded to the scene, the demolition crew who found the basement, even the janitor who cleaned your hospital room. 21 people total, I said, remembering the number from somewhere. How did you know that? 17 victims who died in the original pattern, plus Brennan, plus his 3 assistants from the hospital. 21 people who were supposed to be part of the integration. Dr. Hayes leaned forward. Detective, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. What really happened that night? Not the gas leak story, the truth, so I told her. Everything. Margaret, the 17 dead, the pattern, breaking it by calling 15 seconds early. She listened, without interrupting, her expression never changing. I believe you, she said when I finished. Because last night in my dream, Margaret showed me the same thing. She showed all of us. Why? Because the pattern isn't broken, Detective. It's evolving. Brennan's final experiment, the complete integration, it wasn't meant to happen all at once. It was designed to happen in stages. First, Margaret's consciousness would be scattered across multiple hosts. Then, over time, those pieces would begin to reconnect, to reintegrate, and finally, she would exist as a distributed consciousness across all of us, I finished. Not possessing anyone completely, but present in everyone partially. The vial you found, the one that's growing something, I think that's the physical component. Brennan designed it as a backup. If the consciousness transfer failed, this biological element would ensure Margaret's DNA could be preserved and replicated. That's insane, is it? We're living in an age of CRISPR, gene editing, consciousness uploading research. Brennan was 70 years ahead of his time, but his theories weren't wrong, just unethical and untested. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just a location. Brooklyn General Hospital, or what was left of it. The building had been condemned years ago, left to rot. But the address was specific, the old psychiatric ward. I have to go, I said. I'm coming with you, Dr. Hayes said. Whatever this is, we're all connected to it now. We arrived at the hospital as the sun was setting. The building was a skeleton of its former self. Windows broken, walls covered in graffiti. But the psychiatric ward was different. It looked preserved, frozen in time. Inside, we found the others. All 21 people who had been having the dreams. Sophia Martinez was there, looking confused and frightened. Bill from the evidence locker. The EMTs, the demolition crew, even some people I didn't recognize but who apparently had tangential connections to the case. And in the center of the ward's main room, standing like she'd been waiting for us, was Margaret Arthurs. Not a ghost, not a hallucination. A girl, solid and real, 16 years old. "Hello, Detective Rodriguez," she said. "Thank you all for coming." "You're dead," someone said. "You died 70 years ago." "I did, Margaret agreed, and I didn't. Dr. Brennan's experiments fractured more than just my consciousness. They fractured my existence across time itself. I exist in 1952, dying on that operating table. I exist in 2023, screaming in that building. And I exist here now, in 2024, as the sum of all those fragments. What do you want? I asked. To be whole, she said simply. For 70 years, I've been pieces. Fragments of consciousness scattered across time and space. You broke the pattern that kept me trapped, but breaking it also scattered me further. Into all of you. She gestured to the group. Each of you carries a piece of my consciousness now, not enough to control you or possess you, just enough to share my memories, my pain, and my ability. Ability to see patterns, to know things before they happen, to feel the connections between events that others miss. You've all noticed it, haven't you? Little things. Knowing who's calling before you answer the phone, sensing danger before it appears, finding things that were lost. She was right. Over the past weeks, I'd been experiencing exactly that. Solving cases with an uncanny intuition, knowing things I couldn't possibly know. Brennan wanted to create psychic super soldiers, Margaret continued, to weaponize human consciousness. He partially succeeded, but not in the way he intended. Instead of creating one powerful psychic, he created a network. All of you are nodes in that network now. So, what happens next? Dr. Hayes asked. Do we stay connected to you forever? That's your choice, Margaret said. I can sever the connections, take back the fragments of my consciousness. You'll lose the abilities, the intuition, but you'll also lose the dreams, the memories of my pain. You'll be normal again. Or we complete the integration. Not Brennan's version, where I possess you all, but a true integration where we exist as a collective. 22 minds linked together, sharing knowledge, intuition, experience. You remain yourselves, but with access to so much more. That's insane, someone said. Is it? Margaret asked. You're already experiencing it on a small scale. Imagine what we could do together. A detective who can solve any case. A doctor who can diagnose illnesses before symptoms appear. An EMT who always knows exactly where they're needed most. And you? I asked. What do you get? I get to exist, she said simply. Not as a ghost, not as scattered fragments, but as part of something greater. I get to use my abilities to help people instead of being tortured for them. I get to have the life Brennan stole from me. The room was silent as we all considered her offer. It was tempting, I had to admit. The abilities I'd gained were incredible. But there was a cost. The people who died, I said, the 17 victims. In the original timeline, they died because of you. Because of my pain, Margaret corrected. Because Brennan turned me into a weapon. But that timeline no longer exists. You changed it. Those people lived full lives and died natural deaths. I know, because I can see all the timelines now, all the possibilities. How do we know we can trust you? Margaret walked over to me, reached into her pocket, and pulled out something I recognized. The photograph I'd taken from the basement. But it was different now. Instead of showing Margaret with Brennan and her father, it showed all of us. All 22 people standing together in this room. A photograph of something that hadn't happened yet. Because, she said, I'm giving you the choice Brennan never gave me. You can walk away right now. The fragments will fade over time, the abilities will diminish, and eventually you'll forget all of this, or you can choose to be part of something extraordinary. I looked around the room at the others. Sophia Martinez, young and eager, already nodding. Dr. Hayes, analytical, weighing the options. Bill, practical, probably thinking about all the cold cases he could solve. The others, each with their own reasons, their own desires. "I need to know something first," I said. "The vial, the biological component." "What is it?" Margaret smiled sadly. "It's me. Or rather, it's what Brennan created from my DNA, a biological computer, essentially. Neurons grown from my cells, capable of storing and processing consciousness. If we complete the integration, it will serve as our physical anchor, keeping us connected across any distance. And if we destroy it, then I fade completely. No ghost, no fragments, no network. I simply cease to exist in any form." The choice was clear. We could destroy the vial and end this completely, or we could accept Margaret's offer and become something new, something unprecedented. "We vote," I said. "Everyone gets a say." The vote was closer than I expected. 11 for integration, 10 against. As the deciding vote, I held the vial in my hand, feeling its warmth, the pulse of life within it. I thought about patterns. About the 17 people who had died in a timeline that no longer existed. About Dr. Brennan, hiding in his basement for 70 years, continuing his sick experiments. About Margaret, 16 years old, screaming on an operating table while doctors removed pieces of her brain. And I thought about the cases I'd solved in the past few weeks with my newfound intuition. The missing children I'd found. The murders I'd prevented. "We do it," I said, "but with conditions. We set up safeguards, protocols. If anyone wants out later, they can leave. If Margaret tries to control anyone, we destroy the vial. We do this as equals, or not at all." Margaret nodded. "Agreed." The integration itself was less dramatic than I expected. We stood in a circle, the vial in the center, and Margaret guided us through what was essentially a meditation. I felt the fragments of her consciousness that were already within me expanding, connecting to the others. Not invasive, just present, like having 21 additional senses I could access if I chose. When it was over, we were still ourselves, but we were also more. I could feel Sophia's excitement, Dr. Hayes' clinical curiosity, Bill's satisfaction, and underneath it all, Margaret's relief at finally being whole, even if that wholeness was distributed across 22 people. "So, what now?" someone asked. "Now," Margaret said, her voice coming from all of us simultaneously, "we use what Brennan created for something better. We help people. We solve problems. We prevent tragedies before they happen. That was a year ago. The network, as we call ourselves, has been remarkably successful. Crimes solved, disasters prevented, lives saved. The authorities don't know about us, of course. As far as they're concerned, we're just exceptionally good at our jobs. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I wonder about patterns. About whether we really broke the old one, or just created a new one. 22 people linked by consciousness and trauma, using abilities born from torture and pain to help others. Margaret says the pattern is what we make it, that we've taken something horrible and transformed it into something good. Maybe she's right, or maybe patterns like energy can never be created or destroyed, only transformed. I still work as a detective, still respond to calls in the middle of the night. But now I'm never really alone. The network is always there, whispers of consciousness at the edge of my thoughts. And sometimes, when I arrive at a crime scene, I know things I shouldn't know, see patterns others miss, solve cases that should be unsolvable. People call it intuition. Exceptional detective work. They give me commendations, promotions, praise. They never suspect the truth. The 22 minds are working where they see only one. That a girl who died 70 years ago is helping solve murders in 2024. that Dr. Brennan's horrific experiments ultimately created something he never intended, a force for justice, distributed across the city like neurons in a vast brain. The pattern continues, but now we control it, and that makes all the difference. Sometimes you're not late to save someone. Sometimes you arrive exactly when you're meant to, even if it takes 70 years to get there. And sometimes the real horror isn't in what happens to us, but in what we choose to do with it afterward. My name is Detective Michael Rodriguez, and I'm part of something larger than myself. We all are, whether we know it or not. The patterns that connect us, the invisible threads that bind cause to effect, action to consequence, they're always there, waiting to be discovered. You just have to know how to look. And if you ever find yourself responding to a call late at night, and you get that feeling in your gut that something's not right, listen to it. Because patterns repeat, but they also evolve. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the ghost in the machine. It's discovering that you've become part of the machine yourself. But here's the thing about machines. They're only as good or evil as the people who operate them. And we choose every day to use our connection for good, to save lives, to prevent tragedies, to ensure that no one else suffers like Margaret suffered. The building at 1847 Pitkin Avenue is gone now, replaced by a small park. There's a plaque there commemorating the victims of Dr. Brennan's experiments. Margaret's name is at the top of the list, but Margaret isn't really gone. She's in every case I solve, every life we save, every pattern we recognize before it becomes a tragedy. She's 16 forever, but also ancient, wise beyond her years, existing across time and consciousness in ways that defy simple explanation. The last call I responded to at that building was supposed to be about a death. Instead, it became about a kind of rebirth. 22 people, connected by trauma and transformed by choice, working together to make the city a little safer, a little better. It's not the ending anyone expected, but then again, patterns rarely end the way we think they will. They evolve, adapt, surprise us, and sometimes, just sometimes, they transform horror into hope. My name is Detective Michael Rodriguez. I'm a cop, a node in a network, a piece of a pattern that spans 70 years and 22 minds. And I'm never late anymore. You ever get that feeling when you're standing in a crime scene that something's watching you? Not just wrong, but actively observing, studying your every move? That's how I felt standing in that abandoned subway tunnel in Queens, looking at what was left of our third victim. My name's Detective Anthony Russo, and I've been with the NYPD for 8 years. Thought I'd seen everything the city had to offer. I was wrong. It started 3 weeks ago, September 2nd, Labor Day. While the rest of New York was enjoying barbecues and the last taste of summer, I was staring at a body in an abandoned textile factory in the Bronx. The victim was Marcus White, 34, a sound engineer who worked for a recording studio in Manhattan. What he was doing in an abandoned factory at 3 a.m. was anyone's guess. The body was unusual. That's the word the medical examiner used, though I had other words for it. Marcus was found standing upright, his arms outstretched like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. Rigor mortis had set in, keeping him frozen in that position. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was his ears. They were gone, not cut off, gone, like they'd been surgically removed and the wounds cauterized. No blood, no mess, just smooth skin where his ears should have been. My partner, Detective James Sullivan, had been on the force for 20 years. Vietnam vet, tough as nails, seen action that would make most cops piss themselves. But even Sullivan looked unsettled. "What kind of sick fuck is this?" he muttered, circling the body. The CSI team processed the scene, but there wasn't much to find. No fingerprints, no DNA, no security footage. The cameras had been spray-painted black weeks ago. The only thing they found was an old cassette recorder, the kind from the 80s placed exactly 10 feet from the body. The play button was pressed down, but the tape inside was blank. Or, so we thought. When the audio tech enhanced it back at the precinct, we heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A whisper, repeating over and over, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" The second body was discovered a week later, September 9th, this time in an abandoned music store in Brooklyn. The victim was Jennifer Chang, 28, a podcast producer. Same positioning, standing, arms outstretched, ears surgically removed. Same cassette recorder, same distance from the body. But this time, the whisper was different. "You're not listening. You're not listening." That's when the brass decided to put together a task force. Me, Sullivan, 2 uniforms, Officers Patricia Williams and David Park, and a consultant from the FBE's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Dr. Emily Foster. She was one of those profiler types, mid-30s, sharp as a tack, with this unsettling ability to get into killers' heads. "This isn't about the killing," she said during our first meeting, studying the crime scene photos. "It's about the message. The killer is trying to communicate something, and they're frustrated that no one's listening." "Communicate what?" Sullivan asked. "That's what we need to figure out." But look at the victims. Both worked with sound. Recording, producing, editing. This killer has a specific type. We put out alerts to everyone in the audio industry in New York. Recording engineers, podcast producers, radio DJs, anyone who worked with sound professionally. Most people took it seriously, started traveling in groups, avoiding isolated areas. But you can't protect everyone. The third victim was discovered September 16th, a week ago from today. Thomas Rodriguez, no relation to me, different family entirely. 41, a sound designer for a video game company. This time, the location was different. An abandoned subway tunnel beneath Queens, part of the Old Beach pneumatic transit system that most New Yorkers don't even know exists. I was first on the scene after the uniforms who'd found him. The tunnel was dark, damp, and cold, even in September. Our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. Thomas was positioned the same way as the others, but this time there were multiple cassette recorders, 7 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around his body. "Jesus," Officer Williams said. "It's like some kind of ritual." Each recorder had a different message when we enhanced the audio. "You're not listening. Pay attention. Hear me. I'm still here. Why won't you listen? It's so loud. Make it stop." Dr. Foster was examining the body when she froze. "Detective Russo, come here. Look at this." She was pointing at Thomas's neck. There was something there, barely visible, a surgical scar, old and well healed. "Check the others," she said urgently. We pulled the autopsy reports. Marcus White had a similar scar. So did Jennifer Chang. All 3 victims had had some kind of throat surgery at some point in their lives. "Thyroid surgery?" Sullivan suggested. "No," Dr. Foster said. "The positioning is wrong." This is something else. That's when things got strange, well, stranger. Back at the precinct, I was going through the victims' backgrounds when I found the connection. All 3 had been patients at the same hospital, St. Catherine's in Manhattan, but at different times over the past 15 years. And they'd all been treated by the same doctor, Dr. Leonard Morrison, an ENT specialist who'd retired 5 years ago. We tried to track down Dr. Morrison, but his last known address was a bust. Neighbors said he'd moved out 3 years ago, left no forwarding address. His medical license had been suspended in 2019 for unprofessional conduct, but the details were sealed. It took some digging and a few favors, but I finally got the sealed records. What I read made my skin crawl. Dr. Morrison had been conducting unauthorized experiments on patients under anesthesia. He'd been implanting small devices in their throats during routine surgeries. Devices he claimed could pick up infrasound, sound frequencies below human hearing. He believed that infrasound could be used to communicate with something. The records weren't clear on what. The medical board had ruled him mentally unstable and revoked his license. So, we're looking for a crazy doctor who thinks he can talk to ghosts with sound waves, Sullivan said when I briefed the team. Looks like it, I said. But here's the thing, Morrison would be 73 now. The strength required to position these bodies, to move them to these locations. I don't think he's working alone. Dr. Foster had been quiet during the briefing, studying something on her laptop. Detectives, she said finally, I think I found something. These locations, the factory, the music store, the subway tunnel, they're not random. She pulled up a map of New York, marking the 3 locations with red dots. If you measure the acoustic properties of these spaces, the reverb, the echo, the way sound travels, they're all nearly identical. They all have what's called a 7-second decay rate. That's extremely specific. What does that mean? Officer Park asked. It means our killer chose these locations for their sound qualities. They're using the city itself as an instrument. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the case was bothering me beyond the obvious horror of it. I kept thinking about those whispers on the tapes. Can you hear me now? You're not listening. It's so loud. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was dispatch. Detective Russo, we have another one, but it's different this time. The address they gave me was in Chinatown, an old building that used to house a recording studio in the 70s. When I arrived, Sullivan and Dr. Foster were already there, along with half the precinct. But there was no body. Instead, there was a man sitting in the middle of the room, surrounded by dozens of cassette recorders, all playing different whispers at different volumes. The cacophony was maddening. The man was thin, elderly, with wild gray hair and eyes that didn't quite focus on anything. Dr. Leonard Morrison. Dr. Morrison. I approached carefully, my hand on my weapon. He looked up at me, and for a moment his eyes cleared. Detective, you're finally here. You're finally listening. Doctor, we need you to come with us. No, no, no. He shook his head frantically. You don't understand. I'm not the one doing this. I'm trying to stop it. Stop what? The echo. The echo of the first one. It won't stop. It keeps getting louder. Dr. Foster stepped forward. Dr. Morrison, what echo? What first one? Morrison laughed, a broken sound. My son. Daniel. He was the first. My greatest success and my greatest failure. Over the next hour, in that room surrounded by whispers, Morrison told us his story. He'd had a son, Daniel Morrison, born deaf. As a doctor specializing in hearing, Leonard had been obsessed with finding a way to help his son hear. Traditional methods hadn't worked, so he'd turned to experimental ones. I developed the implants, he said. Microscopic devices that could detect sounds beyond normal human range. I thought if I could widen the spectrum of what could be heard, maybe Daniel could pick up something, anything. What happened? Dr. Foster asked gently. It worked. God help me, it worked too well. Daniel could hear things none of us could. Not just infrasound, but other things. Things that aren't supposed to be heard. He said the city was screaming, that the dead were singing, that there were voices in the walls, in the air, everywhere. Morrison started crying. He couldn't turn it off. The voices got louder and louder. He begged me to make it stop, but I didn't know how. The implants had integrated with his nervous system. Removing them would have killed him. "Where's Daniel now?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. "He killed himself 5 years ago, jumped from the Brooklyn Bridge. But before he died, he said something. He said the voices would find others who could hear. He said they would make them listen one way or another." "The 3 victims," Dr. Foster said. "You gave them the same implants?" Morrison nodded. "Modified versions during their surgeries. I was trying to perfect the technology, to find a way to control it. Each patient was told they were getting experimental treatment for various conditions: tinnitus, hearing loss, vertigo. They all consented, but they didn't know what they were really consenting to. And now, someone's killing them," Sullivan said. "Someone who knows about the implants." Morrison shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. It's not someone. It's Daniel. He's still here, in the echoes, in the sounds of the city. He's trying to make them hear what he heard. He's trying to make them understand." I was about to dismiss this as the ravings of a madman when Officer Williams, who'd been checking the cassette recorders, called out, "Detective, you need to hear this." She'd found one recorder that was different from the others. Newer, digital display showing it had been recording for exactly 5 years, since the day Daniel Morrison died. She hit play. The sound that came out wasn't a whisper. It was a voice, clear and young and impossible. "Dad? Dad, can you hear me? I'm still here. I'm in the sound. I'm in all the sounds. The city is so loud, Dad. It's so loud and no one's listening, and I can't make it stop. Help me make it stop." The room went cold. I mean that literally. The temperature dropped at least 20 degrees in seconds. Our breath came out in visible clouds. And then we heard it. Not from the recorder, but from the walls themselves. From the air around us. From everywhere and nowhere. "You're finally listening." The windows shattered. Not from impact, but from sound. A frequency so intense it turned glass to powder. We all covered our ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside our heads. I saw Sullivan drop to his knees, blood trickling from his ears. Officer Park was screaming, but I couldn't hear him over the noise. Dr. Foster was trying to reach Morrison, who sat perfectly still in the center of the chaos, tears streaming down his face. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard Morrison whisper, "He's chosen the next one." "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my ears still ringing. Morrison looked directly at me for the first time. The implants weren't the only thing that could make people hear. Sometimes trauma does it. Sometimes exposure to certain frequencies does it. Sometimes the city itself chooses who gets to hear its secrets. He pointed at me. "You can hear it now, can't you?" The echo? And God help me, I could. Beneath the normal sounds of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the voices, I could hear something else. A low thrumming, like a heartbeat made of whispers. And in those whispers I could hear Daniel Morrison, along with others. Hundreds of others. Thousands, maybe. "The dead don't leave," Morrison said. "They just become part of the frequency of the city. And once you can hear them, they never stop talking." That was a week ago. Morrison is in custody, technically, though he's been moved to a psychiatric facility. The murders have stopped, but the investigation is ongoing. Sullivan's hearing is damaged, but he'll recover. The other officers are fine, physically at least. But me? I still hear it, the echo. Every night it gets a little louder. Every day I understand a little more of what the voices are saying. They're not angry, they're not malevolent, they're just lonely. They just want someone to listen. Dr. Foster has been helping me, teaching me techniques to filter the sounds, to focus on the living rather than the dead. But she admitted something to me yesterday that chilled me more than any ghost story could. "Detective Russo," she said, "I've been researching the acoustic properties of New York City. The way the buildings are arranged, the subway tunnels, the bridges, they form a pattern. The entire city is essentially a massive resonance chamber." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe Dr. Morrison wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe the city itself is an instrument and we're all just notes in a song we can't hear. Most of us can't anyway." She pulled up a map on her computer, showing sound wave patterns across the 5 boroughs. "Look at this. Every time someone dies in New York, there's a small acoustic anomaly at that location. Usually too small to measure, but it's there. And over time, over decades, centuries even, these anomalies build up. Layer upon layer of sound, creating a kind of acoustic fossil record. Of what? Of every death, every last breath, every final word. It's all still here, Detective. Trapped in the concrete and steel, bouncing off the buildings, riding the subway rails. The entire city is haunted. We just can't usually hear the ghosts." I wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as pseudoscience. But I couldn't. Because I could hear them. Right now, sitting in my apartment in Queens, typing this report, I can hear them. The woman who died in this building in 1987. The man who had a heart attack in the apartment below mine in 2003. The child who fell from the fire escape in 1964. They're all still here, still talking, still trying to be heard. And now I'm wondering, when I die, will my voice join theirs? Will I become another whisper in the echo of New York, another note in the city's endless song of the dead? Morrison's son Daniel was right about one thing. Once you start listening, you can't stop. The city won't let you. 3 days after Morrison's arrest, I thought the case was closed. The murders had stopped. We had our killer, or at least the man who'd started it all, and the brass was happy to wrap it up with a neat bow. Case closed. Good work, everyone. Take a few days off. But you can't close a case when the evidence keeps talking to you. I was at home, trying to sleep despite the constant whispers, when my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was Officer Williams. "Detective, we have a problem." There's been another one. Another murder? Not exactly. You need to see this for yourself. The address she gave me was a radio station in Manhattan, WKRT, one of those old AM stations that mostly played talk radio and weather reports. When I arrived, the place was swarming with uniforms, but they all looked confused rather than focused. Williams met me at the entrance. "The night DJ, Robert Kim, called 911 about an hour ago. Said someone was in the station with him, but when we got here, he was alone. Thing is," she trailed off as we entered the broadcast booth. Robert Kim was sitting at the console, headphones on, speaking into the microphone. But the on-air sign was off, and the station wasn't broadcasting. "Mr. Kim?" I approached carefully. He didn't respond, just kept talking. And that was Blue Moon by Billie Holiday, recorded in 1952. Speaking of 1952, did you know that was the year the Beach Pneumatic Transit Tunnel was sealed? A lot of workers died down there. They say you can still hear them if you know the right frequency. "How long has he been like this?" I asked Williams. "Since we got here. He's not responding to anything, just keeps talking like he's doing a show. But detective, listen to what he's saying." I listened. Kim was reciting details about our case, details that hadn't been released to the public. The positions of the bodies, the surgical scars, the cassette recorders, even Morrison's experiments. "How does he know this?" I asked. "That's not the weird part," Williams said.
She led me to another room where they'd set up equipment to monitor the station's output. The station isn't broadcasting, but something is coming through on their frequency. She turned on a riding the subway rails. The entire city is haunted. We just can't usually hear the ghosts. I wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as pseudoscience, but I couldn't, because I could hear them. Right now, sitting in my apartment in Queens, typing this report, I can hear them. The woman who died in this building in 1987. The man who had a heart attack in the apartment below mine in 2003. The child who fell from the fire escape in 1964. They're all still here, still talking, still trying to be heard. And now I'm wondering, when I die, will my voice join theirs? Will I become another whisper in the echo of New York? Another note in the city's endless song of the dead? Morrison's son Daniel was right about one thing. Once you start listening, you can't stop. The city won't let you. 3 days after Morrison's arrest, I thought the case was closed. The murders had stopped. We had our killer, or at least the man who'd started it all, and the brass was happy to wrap it up with a neat bow. Case closed. Good work, everyone. Take a few days off. But you can't close a case when the evidence keeps talking to you. I was at home, trying to sleep despite the constant whispers, when my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was Officer Williams. "Detective, we have a problem. There's been another one." "Another murder?" "Not exactly. You need to see this for yourself." The address she gave me was a radio station in Manhattan, WKRT, one of those old AM stations that mostly played talk radio and weather reports. When I arrived, the place was swarming with uniforms, but they all looked confused rather than focused. Williams met me at the entrance. "The night DJ Robert Kim called 911 about an hour ago. Said someone was in the station with him, but when we got here, he was alone. Thing is..." She trailed off as we entered the broadcast booth. Robert Kim was sitting at the console, headphones on, speaking into the microphone. But the on-air sign was off, and the station wasn't broadcasting. "Mr. Kim." I approached carefully. He didn't respond, just kept talking. "And that was Blue Moon by Billie Holiday, recorded in 1952. Speaking of 1952, did you know that was the year the Beach Pneumatic Transit Tunnel was sealed? A lot of workers died down there. They say you can still hear them if you know the right frequency." "How long has he been like this?" I asked Williams. "Since we got here. He's not responding to anything, just keeps talking like he's doing a show. But detective, listen to what he's saying." I listened. Kim was reciting details about our case. Details that hadn't been released to the public. The positions of the bodies, the surgical scars, the cassette recorders, even Morrison's experiments. "How does he know this?" I asked. "That's not the weird part," Williams said. She led me to another room where they'd set up equipment to monitor the station's output. "The station isn't broadcasting, but something is coming through on their frequency." She turned on a radio tuned to WKRT. Static at first, then voices. Multiple voices, overlapping, creating a cacophony of whispers and screams and pleas. And underneath it all, a young male voice, clearer than the others. "Can anyone hear me?" "This is Daniel Morrison broadcasting on all frequencies. The dead have something to say, and I'm going to make sure you hear it." I felt the temperature drop again, that same bone-deep chill from the night we found Morrison. "Get everyone out," I told Williams. "Now. Detective, now. And call Dr. Foster. Tell her we need her here immediately." As the uniforms evacuated, I stayed with Kim. He was still talking, but his words were becoming more disjointed, jumping between topics, languages, time periods. It was like he was channeling multiple voices at once. "The Lenape called this place Mannahatta," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "Island of many hills. But underneath the hills were caves, and in the caves were echoes, and in the echoes were... He stopped mid-sentence, his head snapping toward me so fast I heard his neck crack. "Detective Russo," he said in Daniel Morrison's voice. "You're hearing us now, aren't you? All of us? Daniel?" I kept my voice steady. "Is that you?" "I'm everywhere," Kim/Daniel said. "In every radio wave, every cell tower, every Wi-Fi signal. The city is made of sound, detective, and I am the sound. What do you want? To be heard, to be understood. Do you know what it's like to die and discover you're still conscious, still aware, still feeling everything but unable to touch anything?" Kim's face contorted in pain, though I couldn't tell if it was his pain or Daniel's. "The implants my father gave me didn't just let me hear the dead," Daniel continued. "They made me a conduit, a bridge between frequencies. And when I died, I didn't cross over. I got stuck in the static. Dr. Foster arrived then, along with someone I didn't recognize, a tall, thin man in his 40s carrying what looked like modified radio equipment. "Detective, this is Dr. Marcus Webb," Foster said. "He's a specialist in what's called electronic voice phenomena, EVP. He's been studying communication with unconventional sources." Webb immediately started setting up his equipment, muttering to himself about frequency ranges and electromagnetic fields. Meanwhile, Kim continued his possessed broadcast, now speaking in what sounded like Mandarin. "Dr. Foster," I said, pulling her aside. "What the hell is happening here?" "I've been doing research since the incident at Morrison's arrest," she said. "The implants Morrison created, they weren't just receiving devices. They were transmitters too. Every patient who received them became a two-way radio for frequencies we don't normally access." "You're talking about ghost radios?" "I'm talking about the possibility that consciousness, or some echo of it, might exist as electromagnetic patterns after death. And if that's true, then Daniel Morrison isn't just receiving these signals. He's amplifying them, broadcasting them through anyone with the right attunement." Webb looked up from his equipment. "I'm getting massive EMF spikes, centered on Mr. Kim, but extending throughout the building. It's like the entire station has become an antenna. Suddenly, every piece of electronic equipment in the room turned on at once. Computer screens, phones, tablets, all displaying the same message. They need to be heard." And then the real broadcast began. Not through the radio, but through everything. Every speaker, every phone, every surface that could vibrate with sound. Voices poured out, hundreds, thousands of them. I heard testimonies of deaths throughout New York's history. Construction workers buried in building foundations, victims of the draft riots of 1863, children who died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, AIDS victims from the 80s, 9/11 first responders, COVID casualties. Each voice was clear, distinct, desperate to tell their story. And I realized with horror that I recognized some of them. Marcus White's voice was there, and Jennifer Chang's, and Thomas Rodriguez's. The murdered sound engineers were part of the chorus now. "Make it stop!" I shouted over the cacophony. "I can't!" Webb yelled back. "The signal's too strong." "It's using the entire city's electrical grid as a transmission network." Kim stood up suddenly, the headphones ripping away from the console. His eyes were completely white, and when he spoke, it was in a harmony of every voice at once. "We are the unheard. We are the forgotten. We are the echo of New York's pain." The windows started cracking from the sound pressure. I could feel my eardrums ready to burst. Dr. Foster was on her knees, hands over her ears. Webb's equipment was sparking and smoking. And then I remembered something Morrison had said. Once you can hear them, they never stop talking. But maybe that was the point. Maybe they didn't want to stop talking. Maybe they just wanted someone to actually listen. I walked toward Kim, fighting against the wall of sound. "I hear you," I shouted. "All of you." "I hear you, and I'm listening." The voices quieted slightly, like a crowd waiting for someone to speak. "Tell me your stories," I said. "One at a time. I'll listen to every one." Kim's white eyes focused on me. "You would do that?" Daniel's voice, alone now. "You would carry our stories?" "Yes, but you have to let Robert Kim go, and you have to stop killing people to make them listen." "We didn't kill them," Daniel said. "We freed them. They were already carrying pieces of us through the implants. We just helped them transition. They're happier now, part of the collective, part of the song." "That's not your choice to make, isn't it?" My father played God with our hearing. The city plays God with our lives. Why shouldn't we play God with death? Before I could answer, Morrison himself burst into the room. How he'd gotten out of the psychiatric facility I had no idea, but he looked wild, desperate. "Daniel!" he cried. "Son, please!" "This isn't what I wanted." Kim's head turned toward Morrison. "Father!" "You finally came. Let the man go, Daniel. Let them all go. If you need someone to blame, blame me. If you need someone to join you, take me." The room fell silent. Even the electronic devices stopped their chatter. It was like the entire city was holding its breath. "You would do that?" Daniel asked through Kim. "You would join us? Become part of the Echo? If it means stopping this, yes." I wanted to intervene, but Dr. Foster grabbed my arm, shaking her head. She understood something I didn't. This was between father and son. Morrison walked toward Kim, pulling something from his pocket. It looked like a small electronic device, maybe a modified hearing aid. "I've been working on this," Morrison said. "A new implant. One that doesn't just receive or transmit, but translates. Converts the signals into something the living can understand without going mad. If I use it on myself, I can bridge your world and ours properly." "Dad, no." Daniel's voice cracked, sounding for the first time like the scared young man he must have been when he died. "It's okay, son. Let me fix what I broke." Morrison put the device to his ear. There was a sharp electronic whine, and then he collapsed. Kim collapsed at the same moment, finally released from Daniel's control. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Morrison's eyes opened, but they weren't Morrison's eyes anymore. They were young, frightened, and full of pain. "Dad," Daniel said through Morrison's mouth. "Dad, are you here?" "I'm here, son," Morrison's voice replied, though his lips didn't move. The sound came from everywhere at once. "We're together now." In the echo. What happened next is hard to describe. It was like watching two radio signals merge, creating a new frequency. Morrison's body began to glow with a soft blue-white light. The voices in the electronics grew harmonious, almost musical. And then, in a flash that left us all temporarily blind, Morrison disappeared. When my vision cleared, the room was normal again. Kim was unconscious, but breathing. The electronic devices were off, and the voices, the endless chorus of the dead that had been plaguing me, were gone. No, not gone. Just quieter. More organized, like they'd found a conductor for their chaos. Webb's equipment showed something remarkable. The random EMF spikes throughout the city had organized into a pattern, a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. "They're still there," he said in wonder. "All of them. But they're not chaotic anymore. They're synchronized." Dr. Foster was checking on Kim. "He's okay. No permanent damage as far as I can tell. But Detective, look at this." She showed me her phone. every radio station in New York was reporting the same thing. At exactly 3:33 a.m., they'd all broadcast the same message simultaneously, overriding their normal programming. This is Dr. Leonard Morrison and my son Daniel, speaking for the unheard dead of New York City. We are here. We have always been here. We are the memory of this city, the echo of its past, the whisper of its history. We don't seek to harm, only to be remembered. Every death matters. Every life had meaning. Every ending is also a beginning. Remember us, but do not fear us. We are the city's song, and now, finally, we can sing in harmony. The message played once and never repeated. The FCC went crazy trying to figure out how every station had been hijacked simultaneously. They never did figure it out. The official report said that Dr. Leonard Morrison died of a heart attack while attempting to interfere with an ongoing investigation. Robert Kim was treated for exhaustion and released after 48 hours of observation. The technical malfunction that caused multiple radio stations to broadcast the same message was attributed to a sophisticated hack, though no perpetrator was ever found. Case closed, as far as the NYPD was concerned. But for those of us who were there that night, the case never really closed. It just changed shape. 2 weeks after the radio station incident, I was back on regular duty. Sullivan had requested a new partner. He said it wasn't personal, but he couldn't handle being around me anymore. Said I made him nervous, the way I would suddenly stop and cock my head like I was listening to something only I could hear. He wasn't wrong. The voices were still there, just different. Organized, like Webb had said. Instead of a chaos of screams and whispers, it was more like tuning through radio stations. I could focus on one voice, one story, or let them fade into background static. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear Morrison and Daniel. Not speaking to me directly, but maintaining order, conducting the symphony of the dead. My new partner was Detective Maria Santos, a transfer from the Bronx. She was young, ambitious, and completely unaware of what had really happened with the Morrison case, which suited me fine. Our first case together seemed routine. A missing person, Sophia Petrov, 19, an NYU student who hadn't been seen in 3 days. Her roommate was worried because Sophia never missed classes, especially her audio engineering course. That detail made me pause. Another person connected to sound. "Something wrong?" Santos asked, noticing my hesitation. "No, just let's check her dorm room first." Sophia's room was typical college chaos. Textbooks, clothes, half-eaten takeout. But her desk was meticulously organized, covered with audio equipment, recordings, notes about sound frequencies. "Look at this," Santos said, holding up a notebook. She was researching something called the Schumann resonance. Some kind of global electromagnetic frequency? I knew what it was. Since the Morrison incident, I'd done my own research into frequencies and electromagnetic phenomena. The Schumann resonance was essentially Earth's heartbeat, a frequency created by lightning strikes around the globe, resonating between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. But Sophia's notes went deeper. She was trying to find what she called urban resonances, specific frequencies created by cities themselves. And according to her calculations, New York's resonance was exactly 7.83 hertz, the same as the global Schumann resonance, but with harmonic overtones that suggest an artificial amplification. She was onto something, I muttered. "Onto what?" Santos asked. Before I could answer, I heard it. A voice, young and female, frightened. "Help me. They can hear me, but they won't listen. Please, someone listen." It was coming through the computer speakers, even though the computer was off. Santos jumped back. "What the hell was that?" I touched the computer and immediately felt it. That familiar cold, that electric tingle. Sophia was in the network. Not dead, but not quite alive either. Stuck between states, like Daniel had been. "We need to find where she was last seen," I said. "Check her phone records, credit cards, anything with a digital footprint."
Santos looked at me strangely, but complied. Within an hour, we'd traced Sophia's last known location to an abandoned AM radio transmission tower in Staten Island. She'd taken an Uber there 3 nights ago at 11:47 p.m. The tower was part of an old station that had been shut down in the 90s, but when we arrived it was humming with electricity. The fence around it was supposed to be locked, but the chain had been cut. "Should we call for backup?" Santos asked. I probably should have said yes, but I could hear Sophia calling through every piece of metal in the area. The fence, the tower, even our badges were vibrating with her voice. "She's still alive," I said. "We don't have time." We entered the building at the base of the tower. Inside was a makeshift laboratory, computers, oscilloscopes, frequency generators, and in the center, a chair with electronic components attached to it. Sophia Petrov was in the chair, unconscious, with wires attached to her head. But she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, adjusting dials on one of the machines. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a lab coat that had seen better days. "Step away from her," I said, drawing my weapon. He looked up, and I saw recognition in his eyes. "Detective Russo, I've been expecting you." "You know me?" "Everyone in the network knows you. You're the one who can hear us without going mad. The one who listened when Daniel called." "Who are you?" "Dr. Jason Park. I was Morrison's research assistant before he lost his license. I've been continuing his work, but properly this time. Ethically." "Ethically?" Santos pointed at Sophia. "You call kidnapping ethical?" "I didn't kidnap her," she volunteered. "She found my research online, reached out to me. She wanted to hear them too. The echo. Her grandmother died last year, and she's been trying to contact her ever since." "So you wired her to a radio tower?" "It's more complex than that. The tower is just an amplifier. Sophia has a natural sensitivity, like you, detective. But unlike you, she needed help accessing it. The equipment creates a controlled interface between her consciousness and the electromagnetic echo of the dead." I could hear Sophia's voice getting stronger, more desperate. "It's too much. Too many voices. I can't filter them out. Make it stop." "She's in distress," I said. "Turn it off." "I can't." "Not yet. She's too deep in the network. If I disconnect her suddenly, her consciousness might not fully return to her body." "Then bring her back safely." "I'm trying, but..." Park's eyes widened in fear. "Oh no." "They've noticed her." "Who's noticed her?" "The others. The ones Morrison couldn't organize. The angry dead. The ones who don't want to be forgotten. They want revenge." The temperature plummeted. The lights flickered. And through the speakers, through the metal, through the very air itself, came a sound like nothing I'd heard before. Not screaming, but rage given audio form. Sophia's body began convulsing. The machines sparked and smoked, and in the reflection of every screen I saw them. Dozens of figures, shadow-like, pressing against the barrier between their world and ours. "They're using her as a gateway," Park said, frantically adjusting controls. "I can't stop them!" Santos was calling for backup, but I knew they wouldn't arrive in time. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the wires attached to Sophia's head. The shock wasn't electrical. It was psychic. Suddenly I was in the network, the echo, the space between life and death. It was like diving into an ocean of consciousness. Every drop a different voice, a different story, a different death. And there was Sophia, a bright point of living thought in a sea of the dead, being pulled in every direction by desperate, grasping shadows. But I wasn't alone. Morrison was there, and Daniel, holding back the tide as best they could. "Detective." Morrison's voice thought presence reached me. "You shouldn't be here.
Neither should she. Help me get her out. The angry ones are too strong. They've been feeding on the city's negative energy. Every murder, every suicide, every death filled with rage or despair. They're using Sophia's connection to break through. I could see them now, the angry dead. Not just victims, but perpetrators too. Killers who'd been executed, criminals who died in shootouts, victims who died cursing their killers. All united in their rage, their refusal to let go, their desire to return and continue the cycle of violence. There has to be a way, I said. Daniel's presence moved closer. There is. But it requires a choice. Someone has to take Sophia's place. Someone strong enough to hold the gateway closed from this side. I'll do it. No, another voice said. Park. He'd grabbed the wires too, entering the network. This is my fault. My responsibility. I continued Morrison's work without understanding the consequences. Jason, no, Morrison began. It's okay, Doctor. You tried to heal. I tried to understand. But sometimes, the best we can do is protect others from our mistakes. Park's consciousness moved past us, toward Sophia, wrapping around her like a shield. The angry dead turned their attention to him, sensing an easier target. Go, he shouted. Get her out. I'll hold them. I pulled Sophia's consciousness, Morrison and Daniel pushing from behind. The boundary between the network and reality stretched, thinned, and finally broke. I was back in the transmission building, Santos shaking my shoulders. Sophia was gasping, awake, terrified, but alive. Park's body was still in the chair, but I could see the life leaving his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. And then he was gone, but not silent. I could hear him in the network now, adding his voice to the barrier Morrison and Daniel maintained. 3 guardians now, holding back the angry dead. The backup arrived. The official story was that Park had been conducting illegal experiments, had kidnapped Sophia, and had died from a seizure caused by his own equipment malfunctioning. Sophia corroborated the story, too traumatized to say otherwise. But later, at the hospital, she grabbed my hand. You heard her, didn't you? She whispered. My grandmother? I had. In those moments in the network, I'd heard every voice, including an old woman speaking Russian calling for her granddaughter. She said to tell you she's proud of you. I lied. The grandmother hadn't said that. She'd been one of the angry ones, furious at being forgotten. But Sophia didn't need to know that. 3 weeks later, I was finishing paperwork at my desk when Santos approached me. Russo, can I ask you something? Sure. That night at the radio tower. What really happened? And don't give me the official version. I looked at her, weighing my options. Then I decided she deserved the truth, or at least part of it. You ever wonder why New York feels different from other cities? I asked. Why it has this energy, this pulse that nowhere else does. It's New York. 8 million people crammed together. Of course it has energy. It's more than that. Every person who's ever lived and died here leaves something behind. Not just memories or legacies, but actual electromagnetic traces, patterns in the city's frequency. And sometimes those patterns can be accessed. You're talking about ghosts. I'm talking about consciousness persisting as electromagnetic information after biological death. I'm talking about the city itself being a massive storage device for human experience. Santos stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. You know what? A year ago, I would have said you were crazy. But after what I saw, she shrugged. Maybe crazy is just another word for truth we're not ready to accept. She walked away, but turned back. Russo, those voices you hear sometimes, are they peaceful? Some are, some aren't. It's like the city itself.
beautiful and terrible, hopeful and desperate, all at the same time. That night, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing thousands of lives. And beneath the sound of traffic and wind, I could hear it, the echo. Morrison, Daniel, and Park still maintaining their vigil. The organized dead, sharing their stories in orderly succession. And behind them, held back but never fully silenced, the angry ones. New York never sleeps, they say. Now I know why. The dead don't sleep, and in a city with this many dead, the night is never quiet. But I've learned to live with it. To use it, even. Every case I work now, I have witnesses no one else can interview. Every crime scene speaks to me in ways that would terrify most cops. Santos knows, I think. She's never asked directly again, but sometimes I catch her watching me when I pause to listen to something only I can hear. And sometimes, late at night when we're on patrol, she'll turn off the radio and say, "What are they telling you tonight, Russo?" 6 months had passed since the radio tower incident. The Echo murders, as the press had called them, were old news. New York had moved on to fresh tragedies, new scandals. But for those of us who knew the truth, nothing had moved on. If anything, things had gotten more complex. I'd started keeping a journal, documenting the voices I heard, not for evidence or investigation, but for my own sanity. Writing them down made them feel less intrusive, more like interviews with witnesses than invasive whispers in my skull. Santos had become my unofficial partner in more ways than one. She couldn't hear the voices, but she'd developed a knack for reading me, knowing when I was listening to something important. We'd solved 12 cold cases in 6 months, each one guided by testimonies from the dead. The brass was ecstatic. The media called us the miracle detectives. If only they knew. It was a Thursday evening in March when everything changed again. We were investigating a homicide in Washington Heights. A man found dead in his apartment. No signs of forced entry, no obvious cause of death. The victim was Carlos Mendoza, 45, a maintenance worker for the subway system. "Third one this month," Santos said, reviewing the file. "All MTA employees, all found dead in their homes, no apparent cause." I knelt beside the body and immediately felt it. That familiar cold, but different, sharper. The voices in my head went silent, which had never happened before. "Russo?" Santos noticed my reaction. "What is it?" "Something's wrong." "The network. It's quiet." Then I heard it. Not from the network, but from Mendoza himself. His body was dead, but something was still there, trapped. "Can't leave," the voice whispered. "Won't let me." "Holding us, collecting us." "Who's holding you?" I said aloud, not caring that Santos was watching. "The conductor." Down below, in the tunnels, where the trains sing death songs. The body's hand suddenly grabbed my wrist. Mendoza's dead eyes opened, pupils dilated to black holes. 7 days, he said with lungs that shouldn't have been able to hold air. 7 days until the grand performance. All tracks lead to the same station. All trains arrive at midnight. Then the hand went limp. The eyes closed, and Carlos Mendoza was just a corpse again. Santos had her gun drawn, pointed at nothing in particular. What the fuck was that? "A message," I said, my mind racing. "The other victims, were they all found with anything in common? Besides being MTA workers?" She checked her phone, scrolling through the case files. "They all worked on the same line at some point. The abandoned City Hall station. It's been closed since 1945, but maintenance crews still..." She stopped. "Russo, all 3 victims were scheduled to work on the City Hall station in the next month.
Some kind of restoration project. The City Hall station. I'd heard rumors about it from other cops, urban legends mostly. Beautiful architecture, perfectly preserved, but something about it made people uneasy. Maintenance crews hated going down there. Said the acoustics were wrong, that you could hear voices that weren't there. "We need to go there," I said. "It's sealed. We'd need MTA permission. A safety crew. Santos, in 7 days something's going to happen. Something involving the dead, the subway system, and God knows how many people. We don't have time for paperwork." She stared at me for a long moment. "You know, 6 months ago I would have reported you for psych evaluation. Now." She holstered her weapon. "I'll make some calls. I know a guy who owes me a favor." 4 hours later, we were standing at a sealed entrance in City Hall Park. Our MTA contact, a nervous man named Eddie, handed us flashlights and hard hats. "You've got 1 hour," he said. "Any longer and people will start asking questions. And whatever you do, don't go past the lower platform. There's structural damage down there. Whole sections could collapse." We descended into darkness. The station was beautiful, even in decay. Curved tile work, skylights, now dark. Brass fixtures turned green with age. But there was something else, something I felt more than saw. The air was thick with electromagnetic energy, making my skin tingle. "You feel that?" Santos asked. "Yeah. Something's drawing power down here. A lot of it." We followed the platform deeper into the station. The voices in my head were starting to return, but distorted, like a radio being jammed. And then we saw it. The lower platform had been modified. Modern equipment lined the walls: servers, cables, electromagnetic field generators. It looked like Park's setup at the radio tower, but 100 times more complex. And in the center, sitting in what looked like a subway operator's chair surrounded by monitors, was a man I recognized from MTA personnel files. Thomas Chapman, 52, senior electrical engineer for the MTA. He'd been reported missing 2 weeks ago. "Mr. Chapman," Santos called out. He turned slowly, and I saw that he was both alive and not alive. His body was functioning, but his eyes had that same hollow quality I'd seen in the possessed. When he spoke, it was with multiple voices layered together. "Detective Russo, we've been waiting for you. The one who can hear without machinery. The natural conductor." "Who are you?" "We are the forgotten ones, the ones who built this city's veins. Sand hogs who died digging tunnels, workers crushed by cave-ins, passengers lost in crashes. We are the subway dead, and we have been gathering our strength." "For what?" Chapman's face smiled with too many expressions at once. "To take the system back. Every day, millions travel through our graves, never knowing, never acknowledging. But we know every train, every track, every tunnel. And in 7 days, when the moon is new and the electromagnetic fields align, we will show them. Every train in New York will be ours." "You're going to crash the trains?" "No, Detective. We're going to drive them, to stations that don't exist anymore, to tunnels that were sealed, to the places between the living city and the dead one, and everyone aboard will join us in the network." Santos had her gun drawn. "Step away from the equipment." Chapman laughed. "Bullets? Against the dead? You still don't understand. This body is just a puppet. We are in the machines now, in the third rail, in every signal and switch." The monitors around him flickered to life, showing subway maps. But not current ones. These showed every tunnel ever dug, including ones that had been abandoned, sealed, or never officially existed. The ghost infrastructure of New York. "Morrison and his son think they can control us," Chapman continued. "Keep us organized, peaceful. But they only control the surface dead. We are the deep dead, the ones who died in darkness, crushed by the weight of the city itself. We have our own network, our own frequency. If you hurt innocent people, I started. Innocent? Every person who rides the subway travels on tracks laid over our bones. Every tunnel is a tomb. Every station is a cemetery. They owe us acknowledgement, respect, remembrance. Instead, they complain about delays while standing where we died. I felt a familiar presence suddenly. Morrison, pushing through the interference. "Detective," his voice echoed in my head. "You need to destroy the equipment. They're using it to amplify their presence, to override the city's natural frequencies." "How?" "The third rail. They're drawing power from it. Cut the connection." I looked at the massive cables running from the equipment to what must have been the power source. But Chapman was between us and the cables. "Santos," I whispered, "can you hit the power cables from here?" "Maybe, but if I miss, trust me." I stepped forward, hands raised. "You want acknowledgement? Recognition? I'll give it to you. Tell me your names. All of them. I'll write them down, make sure they're remembered." Chapman's multiple expressions shifted to surprise. "You would do that?" Every voice deserves to be heard. That's what Morrison taught me. "So tell me, who are you?" The voices began, one by one. "Patrick O'Brien, died 1901, tunnel collapse. Wong Lee, died 1913, explosion during excavation. Maria Gonzalez, died 1928, pushed onto tracks." Name after name, year after year, a litany of death beneath the city. While they spoke, Santos moved. She's always been a good shot, but this was exceptional even for her. 3 bullets, 3 cables severed, sparks flew, equipment died, and Chapman's body convulsed. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, no longer needing the equipment to manifest. They were in the air itself now, in the metal rails, in the stone walls. "You think you've won?" they screamed. "We don't need machines." "We are the machine. The subway itself is our body now." The platform started shaking, not an earthquake, but rhythmic, like a heartbeat, or like a train approaching. "There's no train scheduled," Santos shouted over the noise. But there was a train. I could see its lights in the tunnel. An old train, the kind they hadn't used since the 60s. And it was packed with shadows, figures that weren't quite there, weren't quite not there. "The ghost train." Chapman's voice echoed from everywhere. "The collective transport of the dead." "And you're at the station." The train pulled up to the platform, its doors opening with a sound like screaming metal. The shadows inside turned toward us, and I could feel their pull. Not physical, but psychic. They wanted us to board, to join them, to become part of the eternal commute. "Russo!" Santos grabbed my arm. "We need to go." But I couldn't move. The voices were too strong, too many. Every person who'd ever died in the subway system was calling at once, and I could hear them all, feel them all. My consciousness was stretching, thinning, being pulled toward the train. Then, suddenly, another train arrived. Modern, bright, impossible. Its doors opened and out stepped Morrison, Daniel, and Park. Not physical, but more solid than the shadows. "Enough," Morrison said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't get to take the living." "You have no authority here," the subway dead responded. "This is our domain." "Actually," Daniel said, "it's everyone's domain. The dead don't own the city any more than the living do. We share it." "Share?" The word was spat with centuries of bitterness. "We built it and died for it, and we're forgotten." "Then let's remember you properly," Park said. He held up something, a device similar to the one Morrison had used on himself. "This won't control you or disperse you. It will integrate you properly into the city's network. Your stories will be heard. Your names will be known, but you can't hurt the living to get that recognition. And if we refuse? Morrison stepped forward. Then we fight. And trust me, the surface dead outnumber the deep dead. Every person who's died in New York for the past 6 months has joined our network willingly. We're organized, we're united, and we won't let you turn the subway into a weapon. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. I could feel the opposing forces, the rage of the forgotten workers versus the protective presence of Morrison's network. The station itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the subway dead spoke through Chapman one more time. We want a memorial, a real one, in every station, with every name. I'll make it happen, I said, finding my voice. I'll go to the press, the mayor, whoever.
I need to. Your names, your stories, they'll be known. The ghost train's doors closed. The shadows inside pressed against the windows, watching us, then slowly faded as the train pulled away into a tunnel that shouldn't have existed. Chapman's body collapsed, finally free. He was alive but unconscious. The equipment around us powered down completely, and the oppressive presence lifted. It's not over, Morrison said, his form already fading. They've agreed to wait, but you have to keep your promise. If those memorials aren't built, they will be, I said. Morrison nodded and disappeared, along with Daniel and Park. Santos and I were left in the dark station with an unconscious Chapman and a lot of explaining to do. The official story was that Chapman had been kidnapped by whoever was killing MTA workers, and we'd rescued him. The equipment was attributed to urban explorers or artists. New York was full of people doing weird projects in abandoned spaces. But I kept my promise. It took 6 months of lobbying, press conferences, and calling in every favor I had, but the MTA agreed to install memorial plaques in the stations. Small ones, listing the workers who died building each section of track. QR codes linked to a website with their full stories. The subway deaths stopped. The voices in the tunnels quieted. And sometimes, late at night when I rode the empty trains, I could feel them. The deep dead, the builders, the forgotten ones, finally at peace. Santos got promoted to lieutenant. She deserved it. She'd been the one to make the shot that saved us, after all. I stayed a detective. The voices were quieter now, but still there, still helping with cases. A year later, on the anniversary of the City Hall station incident, I went back. Officially this time, as part of the memorial dedication. The mayor was there, the press, families of some of the workers who died over the decades. As the mayor unveiled the main memorial, a beautiful brass plaque with hundreds of names, I heard them. Not angry or desperate, but grateful. Patrick O'Brien, Wong Lee, Maria Gonzalez, and hundreds of others, their voices joining in what sounded almost like singing. Thank you, they said in unison, for listening, for remembering, for making us part of the city again, not just its foundation. That night, I updated my journal with a final entry about the Echo murders. The dead don't want to hurt us. They just want to be heard. Every death leaves an echo, a pattern in the electromagnetic fabric of the city. Some echoes are louder than others. Some are angry, some are sad, some are peaceful. But they're all there, waiting for someone to listen. New York City has 8 million living residents and countless dead ones. We share the same space, separated only by frequency. Most people can't hear the dead frequency. I can. It's a burden and a gift. The Morrison network still operates, keeping the peace between the living and the dead. The subway dead have their memorials and their recognition. The city's electromagnetic heartbeat continues, carrying millions of stories in its rhythm. and I continue to listen, to translate, to bridge the gap between what we see and what we can't see but know is there. My name is Detective Anthony Russo. I solve murders in New York City. Sometimes the witnesses are alive, sometimes they're dead, but they all have stories that deserve to be heard. The echo never really ends. It just becomes part of the city's song. And if you listen carefully, in the subway tunnels, in the old buildings, in the spaces between heartbeats, you can hear it too. The city remembers everything, every life, every death, every story. We just have to learn how to listen. Santos found me writing that entry, sitting at my desk at 3 a.m. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "They're louder at night," I said. "But it's okay." They're not angry anymore. They're just talking. What do they talk about? Everything. Their lives, their deaths, their dreams. The city as it was, as it is, as it might be. She sat on the edge of my desk. "Do you ever regret it? Being able to hear them?" I thought about it, about the sleepless nights, the constant whispers, the weight of carrying so many stories. "No," I said finally. "Someone needs to listen. Someone needs to remember. And maybe that's what I was meant to do." "The ghost whisperer of the NYPD," she said with a small smile. "Something like that." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Santos asked, "Will I hear them someday? When I die?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe you'll become part of the echo, adding your voice to the city's song. That doesn't sound so bad, being part of something larger, even after." "Yeah," I agreed. "It doesn't." Outside, New York continued its endless rhythm. Cars, sirens, voices, the living city, built on the foundation of the dead. And somewhere in between, in the frequencies most people couldn't hear, the echo continued. Morrison, Daniel, Park, and thousands of others maintaining the balance. The subway dead, finally acknowledged, resting in their tunnels. And me, Detective Anthony Russo, translator between worlds I never knew existed, until one night when I answered a call about a body in an abandoned factory. The echo murders were over. But the echo itself would continue as long as New York stood. And I would keep listening, keep translating, keep bridging the gap between the heard and the unheard. Because in a city of 8 million living souls and countless dead ones, someone has to be the one who listens to them all. Someone has to remember. Someone has to ensure that death isn't the end of the story, just a change in frequency, and for better or worse, that someone is me. Do you know what nobody tells you about working the night shift in Manhattan? It's not the criminals you should be afraid of. It's what happens when the city thinks nobody is watching. My name is Officer Natalie Reeves, and I've been with the NYPD for 6 years. It's about the week that got me transferred to the day shift. It was a Wednesday in November, one of those bitter New York nights where the wind cuts through your uniform like it's made of paper. I was partnered with Officer Marcus Thompson, a rookie fresh out of the academy, all of 23 and eager to prove himself. Kid reminded me of myself before the city taught me to keep my head down and my questions to myself. We were patrolling the financial district, that maze of glass and steel that turns into a ghost town after the markets close. Our shift started at 11 p.m., and by midnight, the only sounds were our footsteps echoing off the buildings and the occasional taxi hunting for fares. "Quiet tonight," Marcus said, trying to make conversation. "Don't say that," I warned him. "Never say it's quiet. That's when—" The radio crackled. "Unit 2-4-7. We have a 10-52 at 85 Broad Street. Complainant reports strange noises from the building's upper floors. 85 Broad Street.
I knew the building. A 40-story office tower, mostly financial firms and law offices. Should have been empty at this hour except for security. Unit 2-4-7 responding, I said into the radio. The building's lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of place that screamed money. The security guard at the desk, an older guy named Pete, whom I'd seen on previous patrols, looked relieved when we walked in. Officers, thank God. It's probably nothing, but there's been sounds from the 37th floor. What kind of sounds? Marcus asked. Pete shifted uncomfortably. Like footsteps. Lots of them. But that floor's been vacant for 3 months. Company went bankrupt, cleared out everything. Probably just the building settling, I said, though something about Pete's expression made me doubt it. We'll check it out. The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt longer than it should have. Marcus was fidgeting with his belt, a nervous habit I'd noticed he had. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open to reveal a dark hallway. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing empty offices behind glass doors. NYPD, I called out. Anyone here? Silence. Then, just as I was about to suggest we sweep the floor and leave, we heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving in what sounded like a pattern. Like people walking in a circle. Could be squatters, Marcus whispered. I nodded, but something felt off. The footsteps were too regular, too synchronized. We followed the sounds to a large conference room at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but we could see light underneath. Not electric light. It flickered like flames. I pointed at Marcus to take position on one side while I took the other. On my count, we pushed the door open. The room was lit by dozens of candles arranged in a perfect circle on the conference table. In the center of the table was a laptop, its screen showing what looked like a video call. But it was what was around the table that made my blood run cold. 12 office chairs were arranged around the table. In each chair was a mannequin dressed in business attire. But these weren't store mannequins. They were too detailed, too realistic, and they were moving. Not much, just slight turns of the head, subtle shifts in posture, like they were participating in a meeting. What the fuck? Marcus breathed. I stepped closer, keeping my hand on my weapon. The laptop screen showed a grid of video feeds, like a Zoom meeting. Each feed showed a different room, a different person. But something was wrong with the people. They sat too still, stared too intently, never blinking. Then one of them spoke, a woman in the top left feed, her voice coming through the laptop speakers. Officers Reeves and Thompson, we've been expecting you.
I froze. She knew our names. We apologize for the disturbance, she continued. We're simply conducting our monthly board meeting. Lady, I don't know what kind of joke this is, I started. No joke, Officer Reeves. My name is Margaret Sinclair. I was the CEO of Harbinger Investments. This is my board of directors. We've been meeting here every month since our incident. Incident? Our deaths, officer. 3 months ago. Perhaps you heard about it? The Harbinger suicide pact. I had heard about it. 12 executives had killed themselves on the same night, each in their own home, after the company's collapse wiped out thousands of people's savings. It had been all over the news. You're saying you're dead? Marcus asked, his voice shaking. Quite dead, another voice said from the laptop. A man in a suit, his feed showing what looked like a home office. But death, we've discovered, doesn't excuse us from our contractual obligations. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, even from beyond. This was insane. But as I watched, one of the mannequins turned its head toward me. Its face was too perfect, too human-like. And its eyes were wet, glistening like real eyes. These aren't mannequins, I said, backing toward the door. Marcus, we need to go, now. But Marcus was transfixed, staring at the laptop screen. Natalie, look at the timestamps on these feeds. I looked. Each video feed had a timestamp in the corner. They were all dated 3 months ago, the night of the suicides. This is a recording, I said, relief flooding through me. Someone's playing a sick joke. No recording, Margaret Sinclair said. We're quite live, or as live as we can be. Would you like me to prove it? Before I could answer, every candle in the room went out simultaneously. In the darkness, the laptop screen provided the only light. And in that light, I saw the mannequins stand up. Marcus grabbed my arm. Run! We bolted from the room, down the hallway, our flashlights swinging wildly. Behind us, we could hear footsteps. Not hurried, but steady, deliberate. Like a group of executives walking to their next meeting. We hit the stairwell, not trusting the elevator. As we descended, I could hear doors opening on floors above and below us. More footsteps joining the pursuit. What's happening? Marcus gasped as we ran. I don't know. We burst into the lobby. Pete, the security guard, stood up, alarmed. Officers, what? Call for backup, I shouted. Lock down the building. Pete reached for his radio, but then his expression changed. His eyes went glassy, unfocused. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice anymore. It was Margaret Sinclair's. Officers, please. We mean no harm. We simply want to explain. Marcus and I backed toward the exit, but the automatic doors wouldn't open. We were trapped. Explain what? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Pete/Margaret tilted his head at an unnatural angle. The merger. What merger? Between the living and the dead. You see, when we died, we discovered something. The corporate structure doesn't end with death. The contracts we signed, the obligations we accepted, they follow us. We exist in a state of permanent liability. That's impossible. Is it? Every corporation is, legally speaking, an immortal entity. It exists beyond the death of its creators, its employees, its shareholders. We simply found a way to align our consciousness with that immortality. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and out walked the 12 mannequins. But now I could see them more clearly in the lobby's bright lights. They weren't mannequins at all, they were corpses, perfectly preserved, dressed in expensive suits, moving with a horrible semblance of life. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. Wrong deity, Margaret's corpse said, her jaw moving stiffly. We serve a different master now, the great god of capitalism, the invisible hand that moves markets and men alike. You're all insane. Dead, Officer Reeves. We're dead, but not departed. We discovered that if you die with enough debt, enough obligation, enough binding contracts, you can't truly leave. You become incorporated. One of the other corpses stepped forward. I recognized him from news photos. David Chen, not Webb, definitely not Webb, the CFO who'd been found hanging in his apartment. Every person who works in this building, he said, his voice dusty and hollow, signs contracts, employment agreements, non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses. These contracts don't specify that they end upon death. A loophole, or perhaps a feature. We need others, Margaret continued. Others to join our eternal board meeting, to help us manage our portfolios from beyond. The market never sleeps, Officer Reeves, neither can we. The corpses moved closer. Pete, the security guard, walked around his desk, still under their control. Join us, they said in unison. Sign the contract. Become incorporated. One of the corpses held out a document. Even from a distance, I could see it was covered in dense legal text.
The kind that no one ever reads. At the bottom, 2 signature lines. One for me, one for Marcus. "Never," I said. "Then we'll have to initiate a hostile takeover," Margaret said. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red.
In that hellish glow, the corpses moved faster than they should have been able to. Marcus screamed. I heard him fall, heard something that sounded wet and wrong. I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran. Out through the emergency exit that suddenly opened, into the cold November night. Behind me, I could hear Marcus calling my name, but his voice was already changing, becoming hollow, corporate. I didn't stop running until I reached our patrol car. I grabbed the radio, called for immediate backup, officer down, possible 1013. Within minutes, the street was full of flashing lights. They found Marcus in the lobby, unconscious but alive. Pete was at his desk, no memory of the last hour. The 37th floor was empty. No candles, no laptop, no sign that anyone had been there. The official report said we'd encountered squatters who'd drugged us somehow. Hallucinations, stress. Marcus was put on medical leave. He quit the force a month later, said he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd signed something that night, even though he couldn't remember doing it. But I knew better, and I started paying attention. After the incident at 85 Broad Street, I tried to return to normal patrols, tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a shared psychotic episode, anything but what I knew it had been. But once you've seen behind the veil of the city, you can't unsee it. Marcus never came back to the force. I visited him once at his apartment in Queens. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes. He showed me his arms, covered in what looked like legal text, tattooed into his skin, but in a language that hurt to read. "It appears a little more each day," he said, "like terms and conditions, updating. I can feel them in my head, Natalie, the clauses, the obligations. I'm being acquired. That was the last time I saw him. His family said he disappeared a week later. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see him on security cameras around the financial district, always walking toward 85 Broad Street, always at exactly 11:47 p.m. My new partner was Officer James Kowalski, a 15-year veteran who'd specifically requested night shifts. "Day shifts for rookies and Republicans," he'd say with a laugh that never reached his eyes. Kowalski knew things, never said how, but he'd sometimes steer us away from certain buildings, certain streets, at certain times. "City's got its own schedule," he told me one night as we patrolled Tribeca. "You just gotta know when to look the other way." It was 3 weeks after the Broad Street incident when we got the call that would make everything make sense, or as much sense as anything could make in this nightmare. "Unit 2-4-7, we have a 10-54 at the Manhattan Municipal Building. Caller reports finding a body in the archived records room. The Manhattan Municipal Building, a gorgeous piece of architecture from 1914, 40 stories of bureaucracy and civil service. The archives were in the sub-basements, levels that most people didn't even know existed. We met the caller in the lobby, a janitor named Roberto who was visibly shaken. "I was cleaning down in sub-level 3, he said in accented English. "The room with the old contracts, yes?" The door was open. It should never be open. And inside, he crossed himself. Kowalski and I descended into the bowels of the building. The elevator only went to sub-level 2. From there, it was stairs, each level getting older, dustier, more forgotten. The walls changed from modern drywall to brick, then to stone. Our flashlights seemed dimmer down here, like the darkness was heavier. Sub-level 3 was a maze of filing rooms and storage spaces. The air smelled of old paper and something else, something organic and wrong. Roberto had been right. The door to records room 3C was open, its lock broken from the inside.
The body was at a desk in the center of the room, surrounded by thousands of files that had been pulled from their cabinets and arranged in careful stacks. The corpse was fresh. Couldn't have been dead more than a few hours. A woman in a business suit, maybe 40 years old, her hand still clutching a pen. But it was what she'd been writing that made my skin crawl. Pages and pages of contracts, all handwritten, all in blood. The same contract, over and over again, with slight variations. And at the top of each one, the same header: employment agreement between the living and the dead. "Don't read them," Kowalski said sharply. "Never read them." "You know what this is?" He sighed, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. "Natalie, how long you been in the city?" "Born here." "Brooklyn." "Then you know NYC never throws anything away. Every contract, every agreement, every deed, it all ends up down here eventually. Some of it going back to when the Dutch bought Manhattan." He gestured at the files around us. "These aren't just papers. They're bindings, obligations. The city runs on them, and sometimes when enough of them pile up in one place, when the conditions are just right, they become real," I finished. Smart girl. "The city's incorporated, Natalie, has been since 1653, and incorporation, real incorporation, it's about more than just business. It's about binding souls to purposes." I looked at the dead woman again. There was something familiar about her. Then it hit me. I'd seen her picture in the break room. Officer Sarah Mitchell, reported missing 2 weeks ago from the 6th Precinct. "Sarah Mitchell," I said. "She was a cop." "Was," Kowalski agreed, until she started asking the wrong questions. Looking into why so many city employees die on the job but keep showing up in the system. Ghost employees, they call them. Thought it was fraud. But it ain't fraud when they're really working. "You're saying the city employs dead people? How do you think a city this big keeps running? You know how many employees NYC is supposed to have? And how many actually show up? The difference is made up by the incorporated. Those who died in service and can't leave." A sound from deeper in the archives made us both freeze. Footsteps, but weird ones. Too many feet, moving in perfect synchronization. "We need to go," Kowalski said. But before we could move, they emerged from between the file stacks. City employees, dozens of them, in uniforms from different eras. Cops from the 70s, firemen from the 40s, clerks and administrators in clothing dating back over a century. All dead. All still working. At their head was a man in a commissioner's uniform from what looked like the 1920s. When he spoke, his voice was like rustling paper. "Officers Reeves and Kowalski, you're trespassing in restricted archives." "We're investigating a death," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Death?" The commissioner laughed, a sound like files being shuffled. "Officer Mitchell isn't dead. She's been promoted, transferred to our department, the Department of Eternal Services." Sarah Mitchell's corpse stood up from the desk, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. "It's true, Natalie. I've seen the real organizational chart. The city has so many more levels than you know. This is insane." "This is administration," the commissioner corrected. "Every city needs its workers. Living workers demand pay, benefits, time off. The dead only require purpose. And the contracts, oh, the contracts bind them beautifully." He gestured to the files around us. "Every civil servant signs them, buried in the paperwork when you join. A clause here, a subsection there. Did you read every word of your employment agreement, Officer Reeves?" I hadn't. No one did. The stack of papers you sign on your first day, you just sign where they tell you to sign. "Page 247, subsection 18B, the commissioner continued. "In the event of death during service, the employee agrees to continue in their designated role until such time as the city releases them from obligation. It's all perfectly legal. Legal by whose law? Kowalski demanded. The city's law. The old law. The law that was here before humans, that will be here after. The law of obligation and contract. The dead employees moved closer. I could see now that some of them bore wounds, bullet holes, burn marks, crushing injuries. They'd all died on the job, and they were all still working. Join us voluntarily, the commissioner said, and you keep your autonomy. Resist, and eventually the contract claims you anyway. Every city employee dies eventually, and when you do, you'll find yourself right back here in the archives, signing your eternal extension. There has to be a way out, I said. Out? Sarah Mitchell laughed, a wet, horrible sound. The only way out is to find someone to take your place. Transfer the contract. But who would willingly sign their soul to the city? I thought of Marcus, of the text appearing on his skin. Had he been marked? Claimed? Was he wandering the financial district because his contract had already been transferred to him that night? Kowalski pulled out his gun, not pointed at anyone, just held at his side. We're leaving. Now. The commissioner smiled with lips that had long ago dried to leather. Certainly. But remember, officers, every shift you work, every hour you log, you're getting closer to joining us. The city never forgets its employees, never releases them. You'll see. The dead parted, creating a path to the stairs. Kowalski and I backed out slowly, never turning away from them. As we reached the stairwell, the commissioner called out one more time. Check your pay stubs, Officer Reeves. See how many deductions you don't. Recognize each one as a clause. Each one is a chain. We climbed the stairs in silence, emerged into the lobby where backup was finally arriving. The official story was that Officer Mitchell had killed herself in the archives, driven mad by the isolation of working alone. The room was sealed, the files relocated. But that night, I did check my pay stub. And Kowalski was right. There were deductions I'd never noticed. Strange codes that didn't match any union dues or benefits I knew about. DES 001, ETR BIND SOULRET, Department of Eternal Services, Eternal Binding, Soul Retention. How long have you known? I asked Kowalski as we sat in our patrol car afterward. Since my partner died in 09, he said, shot in the line of duty. But I kept seeing him, on security cameras, in reflections, always working his beat. Finally tracked him down. He explained everything, the city's real structure, the incorporation of souls. Why didn't you quit? He laughed bitterly. You can't quit, Natalie. Read your contract. Really read it. The only way out is retirement after 20 years. And even then, only if you've never died on the job. Die before retirement, even a heart attack at your desk, and you're theirs. So we're trapped? Unless we find a loophole. I've been looking for 15 years. There's rumors of a document, hidden somewhere in the city archives. The original charter. The one that started all this. If we could find it, maybe we could break the contracts. The next few weeks, Kowalski and I spent our shifts differently. We still responded to calls, still did our jobs, but we were also searching. Every old building we entered, every basement we checked, we looked for traces of the original charter. Kowalski had a map in his apartment covered in red pins. Each pin was a location where someone had reported seeing dead city workers. The pattern was interesting. They all centered around the oldest parts of Manhattan, the original New Amsterdam. The Dutch, he explained one night, they didn't just buy the island. They made a deal, a contract. And contracts with the old Dutch companies, they had teeth, spiritual teeth. We were parked outside Trinity Church, eating cold pizza and watching the street. It was 2 a.m., that dead time when the city pretends to sleep.
You ever wonder why Trinity Church owns so much land in Manhattan? Kowalski asked.
Never thought about it. They were part of the original deal. The church was supposed to be the counterweight, holy ground to balance the incorporation. But something went wrong. The church got incorporated too. As if on cue, my radio crackled. Unit 2-4-7, we have a 10-52 at Trinity Church. Caller reports someone breaking into the crypts. I looked at Kowalski. He shrugged. Might as well. We're here. Trinity Church at night was something out of a Gothic novel. The cemetery, with headstones dating back to the 1700s, was shrouded in fog. The church itself loomed dark against the sky, its spire disappearing into low-hanging clouds. The gate to the cemetery was open. Fresh footprints in the mud led toward the church's side entrance, the one that led to the underground crypts. The door was ajar. Backup? I suggested. For what? Officially, we're checking on vandals. The crypts were older than anything I'd seen in the city. Stone passages that predated the church above, incorporating structures from the original Dutch settlement. Our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. We heard voices ahead. Not English. Something older. Dutch, maybe, or something that predated even that. The passage opened into a larger chamber. In the center was a figure I recognized. Sarah Mitchell. But she wasn't alone. There were dozens of others, all in various stages of decay, all wearing city employee uniforms from different eras. They were standing around a stone altar that looked far older than anything Christian. On the altar was a document. Even from a distance I could see it was ancient. Vellum or parchment, covered in cramped writing. The charter, Kowalski breathed. Sarah Mitchell turned to us. Her dead eyes were somehow bright with purpose. Officers, you're just in time for the renewal. Renewal? Every 100 years, she explained, her voice carrying the echo of the tomb. The original contract must be renewed, signed again by representatives of the living and the dead. It's November 30th, the anniversary of the original purchase. I realized with a chill that she was right about the date. How had I not noticed? If it's not renewed, she continued, all the contracts are void. Every incorporated soul is freed, but also the city dies, really dies. Because without us, without the dead who keep working, New York would collapse in a week. That's bullshit, I said. Is it? Who do you think maintains the deep infrastructure? The tunnels that no living person enters? Who keeps the old foundations from crumbling? Who processes the paperwork that never seems to end? The living handle maybe 30% of the city's actual function. The rest is us. An elderly man in a mayor's sash from the 1800s stepped forward. The renewal requires 2 signatures. One from a living city employee who understands the truth. One from a dead one ready to take on the burden of administration. And if we refuse? Then at midnight, every incorporated soul is released. Sounds good, right? Except we're not the only things bound by the contract. The city itself is incorporated. Its spirit, its energy, what makes New York, New York. Without the contract, it all unravels. 8 million people wake up in a dead city. No power, no water, no heat. Because those systems aren't just mechanical, they're maintained by the incorporated. I felt Kowalski tense beside me. This was his loophole, but not the way he'd imagined it. Free everyone, but destroy the city in the process. There has to be another way, I said. Sarah smiled sadly. There is. Renegotiation. What? The contract can be amended, made more humane. Give the incorporated shifts off, rotation, the ability to truly die after a certain term of service. But it requires both sides to agree. The mayor stepped forward, holding out a quill that looked like it was made from bone. Will you negotiate on behalf of the living? I looked at Kowalski. He nodded slowly. Better than the alternative. I took the quill. It was cold. so cold, it burned. What are the terms? For the next 3 hours, we negotiated. The dead had their demands: recognition, respect, proper memorial sites. The living, represented by just Kowalski and me, had ours: transparency, voluntary service only, term limits on incorporation. The charter itself seemed alive, words rearranging themselves as we spoke. I could feel the city breathing around us, waiting. Every time we agreed on a point, the temperature would rise slightly. Every disagreement brought frost. Finally, as dawn approached, we had new terms. Incorporation would be voluntary, clearly stated in contracts. Maximum term of service after death, 50 years. The incorporated would work only night shifts. When the living weren't around, families would be notified and compensated. A Department of Eternal Services would be officially recognized with labor protections. "It's not perfect," Sarah said, "but it's better." I signed. Sarah signed. The moment our signatures touched the parchment, the city shuddered. Not an earthquake, but something deeper. A structural change in reality itself. "It's done," the mayor said. "The contract is renewed and amended. You've bought the city another century." As sunlight began to filter into the crypt, the incorporated began to fade. Not disappearing, just becoming less visible. "We'll still be here," Sarah said as she became translucent, "working the night shift, keeping the city running. But now it's a job, not a prison." "What about those already incorporated against their will?" I asked. "They can choose. Stay and work their 50 years, or pass on. Most are choosing to stay, at least for a while. This city gets in your blood, Natalie. Even death can't cure you of being a New Yorker." She was gone. They were all gone. The charter crumbled to dust. Its purpose served. Kowalski and I stood in the empty crypt, trying to process what had just happened. "We should report this," I said. "Report what?" "That we just negotiated labor rights for ghosts." We left the church as the city woke up. Everything looked normal. People heading to work, taxis honking, the usual chaos. But I could see the difference. In the shadows, in the spaces between. The incorporated were there. Working. Maintaining. Keeping New York alive. That was 6 months ago. I'm still on the night shift by choice now. I see them sometimes. The incorporated. They nod at me as I pass. Professional recognition between shift workers. Marcus came back. He works for the Department of Eternal Services now, liaison between the living and the dead. The text on his arms turned out to be his contract, fully visible now that the terms are transparent. "It's not a bad gig," he told me. "Full benefits, and I mean full. Death benefits included." 6 months after the contract renewal, New York had adapted to its new reality. The Department of Eternal Services was officially recognized, hidden in the city budget under night infrastructure maintenance. Most people didn't ask questions. Those who did were quietly informed that some things were better left unexamined. I'd been promoted to detective, specifically assigned to what they called temporal crimes, cases involving both the living and the incorporated. Kowalski was my partner still, though he was counting down to his retirement. 5 more months and he'd be free. Really free. As long as he didn't die on the job. It was a Thursday in May when we got the call that would test everything the new contract had established. "Detectives, we have a situation at 1 Police Plaza," the dispatcher said. "Commissioner wants you there immediately." 1 Police Plaza, the headquarters of the NYPD. When we arrived, the building was in subtle chaos. Not enough for the public to notice, but every cop there was on edge. Commissioner Patricia Hayes met us in her office. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her desk was a figure I recognized from old photographs. Theodore Roosevelt. Not a look-alike, The actual Theodore Roosevelt, in his commissioner uniform from 1895. "Detectives," Hayes said, her voice strained. "We have a problem." Roosevelt stepped forward. He looked exactly as he had in life, except for a slight translucency and eyes that held over a century of death. "Someone is murdering the Incorporated," he said in that famous energetic voice. "3 of my officers in the past week, which should be impossible." "How do you murder someone who's already dead?" I asked. "By erasing them," Roosevelt replied. "Not just destroying their physical form, but removing them from the contract. Deleting their incorporation. They don't pass on. They simply cease. No afterlife, no peace, just nothing." Kowalski whistled low. Who could do that? Commissioner Hayes pulled up files on her computer. "That's what we need you to find out." The victims were all incorporated officers who died in the line of duty between 1890 and 1920. They were working their night shifts in the subway system when they just vanished. Witnesses? Other incorporated. They reported seeing a figure in an old Dutch magistrate's outfit. He carried what looked like a ledger. Every name he crossed out ceased to exist. Roosevelt's face was grim. "We believe someone has found the original ledger, the one that predates even the charter, the record of every soul bound to New Amsterdam and then New York." "I thought the charter was the original document," I said. "The charter was version 2, Roosevelt explained. The Dutch kept a ledger first. Every person who died in the colony, their name was entered. It was meant to be a simple record. But the indigenous peoples who originally inhabited this land had warned the Dutch. This place was special. The boundary between worlds was thin here. Writing down the names of the dead here would bind them to the land. So someone has this ledger and they're using it to... what? Erase the dead? Not just erase. Edit. Change the terms of existence retroactively. Roosevelt pulled out a photograph, old and yellowed. This was taken in 1891 at City Hall. The photo showed a group of officials, but there were gaps, spaces where people should have been, their absence obvious from the positioning of the others. Those gaps are where incorporated officials stood. They've been edited out of history itself. A chill ran down my spine. If they can edit the dead out of history, they can edit the city, Hayes finished. Every incorporated soul who helped build New York, maintain it, shape it, erased, and their contributions with them. Buildings might vanish. Infrastructure could collapse. Entire neighborhoods that were built by incorporated workers could cease to exist. "We need to find this person," Kowalski said. "Fast." Roosevelt handed us a list. "These are the incorporated most at risk, the oldest, the most integral to the city's structure. Guard them, and you might catch our editor." That night, Kowalski and I stationed ourselves in the City Hall subway station, the same abandoned station where parts of the city's incorporated infrastructure were maintained. It was a hub for the dead workers, a place where they could exist more solidly. The station was beautiful in its decay, but now it also served as an office of sorts for the incorporated. Dead workers from every era gathered here between their shifts, sharing stories, coordinating maintenance. We'd been there for 3 hours when the temperature dropped. Not the normal cold that accompanied the incorporated, but something deeper. The kind of cold that existed before heat was invented. He appeared at the far end of the platform, a tall figure in 17th century Dutch clothing, carrying a massive leather-bound ledger. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and when he walked, he didn't quite touch the ground. "Detectives," he said in accented English. "I am Adrien van der Donk, first lawyer of New Amsterdam, keeper of the original records." "You're the one erasing people," I said, my hand on my weapon, though I knew it would be useless. "Not erasing, correcting. The incorporation was never meant to be permanent." It was a temporary measure that became eternal through bureaucratic oversight. You're destroying souls. I'm freeing them. Every name in this ledger is a soul in pain, bound to serve a city that has forgotten them. Better to cease than to suffer eternally. That's not your choice to make, Kowalski said. Vanderdonk laughed, a sound like autumn leaves being crushed. I wrote the original law. Every incorporation law that followed was based on my work. If anyone has the right to undo it, it's me. What about the city? I asked. Without the incorporated, New York dies. Perhaps it should. Perhaps something better could be built on its bones. A city that doesn't require the dead to function. A city that lets its souls rest. He opened the ledger, pulled out a quill that looked like it was made from shadow itself. I'll start with Theodore Roosevelt. His incorporation has been particularly aggressive in maintaining the system. Roosevelt stepped out from behind a pillar. Adrienne. It's been a long time. Vanderdonk paused. Theodore. Still playing police commissioner after all these years? Someone has to maintain order, both among the living and the dead. Order. Is that what you call this eternal servitude? I call it duty, something you abandoned when you decided to become judge, jury, and executioner for the incorporated. They faced each other, two dead men from different centuries, representing different views of death and duty. The air between them crackled with an energy that made my teeth hurt. You know, Roosevelt said, there's something you should know about that ledger. Vanderdonk gripped it tighter. What? It's not complete. When the British took over from the Dutch, they created their own records. When America became independent, more records. Your ledger only controls the Dutch Incorporated, a fraction of the city's dead. It's enough. If I remove the foundation, the rest collapses. Not if we stop you. That's when I saw them. Hundreds of incorporated from every era of New York's history, emerging from the shadows of the station. Cops, firefighters, construction workers, clerks, all the dead who kept the city running. You would fight me? Vanderdonk asked. I'm trying to free you. We don't want your freedom, Sarah Mitchell said, stepping forward. We chose to stay. The new contract gives us purpose, community, a chance to serve even after death. You would take that away because you think you know better? Vanderdonk raised the quill. I'll erase you all if I have to. Try it, Roosevelt challenged. What happened next was like watching a battle between ideas themselves. Vanderdonk would write a name, and an incorporated would flicker. But the others would concentrate, reinforcing their colleagues' existence through shared memory and will. The ledger's power was old, but the collective will of New York's incorporated was vast. I realized what I had to do. While the dead fought their metaphysical battle, I approached Vanderdonk. He was so focused on his ledger, he didn't notice until I was right beside him. You know what your problem is? I said. You're still thinking like it's 1655, like you can make unilateral decisions for everyone. I am the first lawyer. We're the first lawyer. Now you're just another incorporated thinking you know best. I grabbed the ledger. It burned my hands with cold, but I held on. This is New York. We vote here. We negotiate. We compromise. Let go. Make me. He tried to pull the ledger away, but something strange happened. The moment my living hands and his dead hands both held the book, it began to change. Pages appeared that hadn't been there before. Modern pages. Digital-looking, almost. What's happening? Vanderdonk gasped. Roosevelt laughed. The ledger is updating, incorporating itself into the modern contract. You forgot, Adrienne. Documents in New York evolve. They adapt. Just like the city itself, the ledger transformed, becoming something hybrid, part ancient tome, part modern database. And in that transformation, Vanderdonk's absolute control over it shattered. No. He tried to write another name, but the ink wouldn't flow. The incorporated he'd tried to erase began to re-solidify, their existence restored by the updated ledger. "It's over," I said. "The ledger belongs to the city now. All of it, not just the Dutch part." Vanderdonk collapsed, the weight of centuries suddenly visible on his face. I just wanted to rest. To finally rest. "Then rest," Roosevelt said, not unkindly. "The new contract allows for it. 50 years of service, then you can choose to pass on. You've served far longer than that." I can rest?" Sarah Mitchell approached, helped him to his feet. "We all can, when we're ready. That's what the new contract provides. Choice." Vanderdonk looked at the transformed ledger in my hands. May I add one more entry?" I handed it to him. He wrote carefully, deliberately. "Adriaan Vanderdonk, first lawyer of New Amsterdam, completes his service. May he find the peace he sought to give others." The moment he finished writing, he began to fade. Not being erased, but passing on, moving beyond. His last words were, "Tell the living, the city is in good hands." He was gone. The ledger in my hands felt different now, lighter.
When I opened it, I saw that it had become something new, a record not of bondage but of service. Each name now had dates of service, terms of incorporation, and most importantly, an end date, a choice. "What do we do with this?" I asked Roosevelt. "We put it where it belongs, in the Department of Eternal Services. Let it be a record of honor, not of binding." Commissioner Hayes was waiting for us when we returned to One Police Plaza. The crisis was over, but the implications were just beginning. "The mayor wants to know what happened," she said. "Tell him the night shift handled it," I said. She smiled slightly. "The night shift?" "Right, that was 3 months ago. The ledger now sits in a special vault, accessible to both living and dead. The Incorporated use it to track their service, to plan their eventual rest. Some choose to stay indefinitely, Roosevelt among them. Others, like Vanderdonk, choose to pass on. Kowalski retired last month, made it to his 20 years without dying on the job. He's in Florida now, sending me postcards with terrible jokes about finally seeing the sun. I'm still on the night shift, by choice. Someone needs to be the bridge between the living city and the dead one. Someone needs to make sure the contract is honored by both sides. Marcus is my partner now. He's technically alive, but his work with the Department of Eternal Services has changed him. He can see both sides clearly, speak to both the living and the dead. Together, we handle the cases that fall between worlds. New York never sleeps, they say. Now I know why. It's not just the city that never sleeps. It's the countless souls who keep it running, shift after shift, year after year, death after death. But now they work by choice, with dignity, with an end in sight if they want it. Last night, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge at 3 a.m., looking out over the city. In the shadows between the lights, I could see them, the Incorporated, maintaining the infrastructure, keeping the city alive. They waved at me as they worked, and I waved back. Professional courtesy between night shift workers. The city has many layers. Street level is for the living during the day. But at night, in the depths, in the spaces between, the dead keep everything running. It's a strange system, but it works. And honestly, I can't imagine New York any other way. After all, if the city can incorporate the dead, bind souls with contracts, and negotiate labor agreements between the living and the deceased, then anything is possible. That's the real magic of New York. Not that the impossible happens, but that we find a way to make it work. to make it normal, to make it just another part of city life. My name is Detective Natalie Reeves. I work the night shift in New York City, investigating crimes that span both life and death, and I wouldn't have it any other way.